Okay, so first of all, we'll just check if the audio is working and then we can start. Okay. Okay, I think it's working. So yeah, let's get started here. So we are here to talk about City of Echoes. The book's been out for about a month and a half, give or take. So I've done most of my content after this live stream. There's just two more podcast reviews to kind of do, and I'll have finished my usual kind of novel coverage on this book. But yeah, I always like to do these kind of live stream discussions in terms of like, okay, I kind of do a broad overview of this when I do my spoiler review, but there's a little bit of a different feel when I do the kind of the live stream discussion because it comes right towards the end after I've done a lot of the discussion, seen a lot of the reaction to the book, that sort of thing. I think broadly speaking, the reception has been pretty good, though I definitely get the impression there hasn't been, I would say, overall as much interest just in terms of numbers of people checking out this book as there have been for the previous books. I think there is definitely just a slight sense with this one, and it probably makes sense with what the series actually is, that the kind of extra novel is kind of being treated by the fandom as the extra novel, and it's not maybe getting the attention of the full kind of series style stuff. I think there definitely is some interest here. It seems to still be selling pretty well because like they highlighted that it went on the New York Times bestseller list in the kind of YA section, YA fantasy section. But is it doing as well as the other stuff? It's hard to say necessarily, but ultimately my general thoughts are that for the first book starting off this new series, this new style of book, I think they did a pretty good job here in that, like, I think it was the right choice to do it in ATLA. And Jin actually is probably the right character to start off with as well, because it gives you a mostly open character, but she's remembered for, one major kind of a, part of an episode. But as we'll get into, the location also seems to be just as important. So yeah, it's about the unsung heroes of the Avatar world, and that's the whole point here with Jane, is that they're kind of saying that, she's not just the girl that Zuko went on a date with that one time. That's your knowledge of her just from the previous material that we have with her. Actually, she had her own stuff going on. Yes, that date was part of that kind of period of her life, but also she was kind of on the outskirts of being like quite heavily involved in a lot of this stuff, and was in places you in no way expected her to be, because we only focused on her for a pretty small period of time. And this seems to be part of the series as well, is that they kind of are going for the idea that like a character that was more involved in a big event from the show than you ever thought. The series, of course, is going to be multi-era as we go forward, because if you go to the product listings here, you can see Legend of Korra is mentioned in the kind of descriptor here before we get into the specifics of this book. So I'm sure other eras are probably on the table eventually, but it gives the idea that I guess at least early on we're going to go for Avatar and Korra as well, which I think is the kind of the right choice, the right thing to do as well. So that's the thing here, is like coming out of this, I have no real idea for sure what the second book is going to be, because I'm assuming they're going to use the gimmick they have of it being Avatar Legends and switch eras. And if they do that, they're going to go for Korra. I just don't know what character they're going to pick. I think Republic City probably makes sense to be maybe the location you tell a story in, just because there's so much room to sort of tell a story of what was going on in this district of the city, while the Equalist stuff was going on, or like while this other stuff was going on. It's just, yeah, which character do you choose? Do we do a Scoochie novel? Oh, I don't know if there's interest in that. And then, does it have to be a teenage character here or not? That's the other point. Getting into my overall thoughts, I think it's good. Like, I think you have to say it's another good novel. It's very different than Chronicles of the Avatar. It's very purposefully like the exact opposite of Chronicles of the Avatar. That is a series about the most important character in each era it tells the story in, whereas the idea is we're almost doing the exact opposite. This is about one of the more normal characters who kind of ends up being a little bit more important than you thought. And I think that's a kind of clever way to do things overall. But yeah, this one works well. Jin is a memorable character prior to this book, and in that sense made for a pretty nice kind of character where, yeah, there's a lot of ground to work with her, and you're not locked into a ton of specific things with her. But like I say here, it's not just about Jin and the other characters who make their appearances, just the references. The location is, you know, in a way, its own character, to some degree, maybe the highlight of the book, because of the way they kind of characterize the lower ring of Ba Sing Se. The lower and kind of middle ring of Ba Sing Se. The kind of parts that we kind of, for the most part, skimmed over a little bit. We only saw small bits and pieces of it, where Team Avatar pretty quickly got into the kind of upper ring, and even Iroh and Zuko only stayed in kind of the lower middle ring for like a little bit. We glanced past it, but we dive into it much more heavily here, which I thought was one of the coolest parts of the book, because it's not just, oh, here's the community of the people who live in the kind of worst off part of the city, but then also the Silver Fang stuff coming into play to kind of add to the idea of, oh, here's why it's maybe not as bad as you think. It's because efforts have been made to redistribute the kind of wealth and kind of opportunities type thing. That's kind of a very fun and interesting part of the book that, to me, it is probably one of the big reasons why, like, in a way, this was the story picked. Is that, like, okay, you want to tell a Jin story, but it's, you get to explore Ba Sing Se through Jin. And so you get both of those kind of angles, which is kind of cool. I think a fun thing, especially because we didn't know too much about this, even with the preview pages, in terms of, like, how far was this book going to go into the story? I think in my own head, I had it in my head that, yeah, we're probably going to wrap this up in around the invasion. You know, we'll probably end with, you know, just the idea, like, Jin in a overtaken Ba Sing Se, maybe a little bit hopeful for the future with something happening, and maybe cut to the ending of the show. But actually, they made the decision here, interestingly, to go all the way from pre-City of Walls and Secrets to all the way to the end of the series, which made, like, the ending of the book especially like, oh, we're doing this here. Like, the eclipse has happened, Sozin's Comet is happening here, and it's quite fast paced, of course, because you're focusing on the Jin angle of this. But it's really, really, I think, interesting, especially with the White Lotus connection and how that plays into the retaking of Ba Sing Se. That there was more than just the old masters taking back the city. It was a coordinated effort led by the White Lotus, but more than just those notable characters, which I thought was cool. Writing style. So we have Judy Lin, first book by Judy Lin here. First Avatar novel in the first person as well. I didn't mind it. I thought it worked perfectly fine. It takes a little bit of getting used to if you're super into the novels and are just used to the third person perspective, but it's fine. It makes sense. And I think for this series, I don't know, I get the impression this might be the way they go for with this, and that if it is going to be sort of like one-shot novels about an individual character, this might just be the approach that they take here, to just tell it all from a specific character's perspective and just go with that as the kind of angle. So that's fine. It worked out well. I thought it was just very readable. Her writing style, like, it doesn't stand out to me as, like, absolutely, like, best writing style ever, but it's super, super readable. Like, it's probably the easiest of the novels to just, like, read straight through, because it's pretty just like clear presentation of the characters and the story and what we're doing. It doesn't get overly bogged down with description or giving you too much context on this or that. There are maybe moments where you maybe wish it could have like just slowed down a little bit and given you a little bit more of that. But that's kind of where we get into the idea of this being kind of like an add-on book to the arc, where there was no real, we need to super focus on the world building here, because you kind of know where we're at. And that's kind of what they do here. In Chronicles of the Avatar, they're aware the whole time through that you don't really have a super strong foundation in the Yang Chen era. So anything they tell you about the world is going to be interesting. Whereas this book definitely feels like it's written with the idea that everyone reading this book has the context of City of Walls and Secrets, Tales of Ba Sing Se, Lake Laogai. You know the basics on Ba Sing Se, so we don't need to go into that. We can just focus on the characters and any new elements that are kind of in play. But yeah, had depth where needed. Pace was kept up pretty nicely. A criticism I would have perhaps, and this is maybe just more specifically to me because I like a more extended epilogue for a novel, is that I did feel the ending got like particularly fast paced, and especially the way the book kind of like ends the present day story and then straight into the rather short and brief epilogue chapter. That's where I think the criticism of this book maybe comes in a little bit, where the book to me does sort of end a little bit in mid-air when it comes to Jin. Like, a big part of this book is presenting all the different crazy things going on in Jin's life. She's being dragged all over the place by her different responsibilities. And it's like, at the end, did we ever really come back around to properly resolve that? Where, like, okay, the plot sort of gives you a sense for, like, she's likely going in this direction and maybe not this direction. But the fact that that didn't get resolved, I felt like there was too much of a sense where, like, wouldn't it be clever if we also ended this book at the exact same point where ATLA ended? But the difference is, like, when are we going to come back around to Jin to cover any more of this? And I would have just liked a slightly better ending here with regards to just giving a bit more time for Jin, Xuan, and Susu to interact together now that the action has sort of ended. Because, of course, Susu rejoins the group sort of towards the end of the book, but because she's not involved in the action in particular, it means she kind of falls out of the story like a little bit. And because she hadn't been in the story for most of the book, there's a little bit of a sense where, like, yeah, I would have liked a little bit more there. Yeah, there's definitely a few points where, like, yeah, you know, it's whether we found a key at some point, give more details. I think there's another point where it's like, Xuan got us, I think it's literally, Xuan somehow got us through the checkpoint, like right at the end. I get it, the book had covered a few times of, like, actually it's somewhat easy to get through some of these checkpoints into the different rings, but it was just like, okay. That's fine, I get it, you want to just get to the next big point, but, you know, don't go crazy fast. So that's that. Other slight criticism, some people I think will make a much bigger deal out of this, but, like, I think the continuity / mistake point needs to be brought up, but I don't think it's a, like, giant criticism against the book. I want Avatar Studios to be better at catching these errors, because some of them are definitely mistakes they shouldn't be making. But also you have to acknowledge that, like, 95% of the book actually deals with the logistics, the continuity, the canon really well. Because, again, this book has to sort of mesh onto the side of mostly like 3-4 episodes of ATLA, and it does it actually quite well, and actually has some very clever uses of continuity, but some people will only focus on the mistake and not the fact that, like, hey, they do some clever stuff, like like with the incorporation of Mok Mu Ling into the story, General Sung into the story to explain why the Lake Laogai base is flooded in Korra. They're all really, really good. Them making the mistake with the manager of the tea shop is something that's like, but, you know, we have to be kind of reasonable with this as well. We'll get into that. That's probably the first kind of big point we'll get into, just to explain it. Then we can go through the characters. I do think, for me, Chronicles is the overall more interesting series of novels, and probably will be going forward. But what I like about this is that it is going to be alongside Chronicles. That unlike the comics, where they switched from the main series to the one-shots, and there was no crossover. It was just, we're done with these, now we're doing this. With the novels, at least we know, the plan is to release one of each year. We're still getting the second Roku novel right at the end of the year, but it's happening this year. We're not stopping that. This is just an in addition. The only slight frustration is just that they've given this book the previous novel slot. So the Roku book 2 is being slightly delayed, I guess, partly because of that. But now we know that, I guess, this will be the summer release. Chronicles will be like the winter release in terms of novels. That's fine. Maybe the comics could learn something from that. And that's sort of the idea there. But yeah, it's a cool thing just to have this kind of additional story onto the top of things. A lot is going to depend on character choice. Jin plus Ba Sing Se worked really well here. But like if they get the wrong character for Korra, theoretically, or they choose the wrong location, there might be a lack of interest there. But hopefully the Korra fans come out in force to support a Korra novel, and that's sort of the idea there. But I will say, I don't immediately have a Korra like minor character that kind of comes to mind immediately. With what I'm assuming are probably the same restrictions the Chronicles novels have, which is that like it has to be a teenage character, and it's like, who are we doing there? And then like, is Jin super representative of like the character that we're doing, where it's a one episode character, or can we actually do this with someone who's like a little bit more in depth? That sort of thing. Like, you know, mentioned in chat there, Tano. That's interesting. He actually appears in a couple of different episodes. That could be a way to do it. He's like it seems like the right age. He's in Republic City, so you can cover all that stuff. But is he too involved to a certain degree? Like, he's too... he met Korra too many times. Like, does that rule him out, the fact that he knows Korra? There's situations like that. Iroh 2, that might be kind of a situation where they have to do something like that. Where that would actually be very interesting. If like you wanted to actually go into the Iroh 2 backstory, show us him as a teenager, and it's actually I suppose you're going into like either really early Korra era, where like Korra is just a baby at that point in time, or late Aang era type stuff. It's interesting, but obviously the idea is that like, yeah, they for this one they chose Jin and not like Haru. That sort of kind of distinction. They went on the more minor side of things than supporting in a way. So it's a tricky situation there. So yeah, with Korra, they might have to choose someone who's a little bit more kind of out there, involved in the story, in terms of like, you know, Kai, you know, or is that kind of the sort of character we can maybe pick? I don't know. And then yeah, like they're kind of doing with the upcoming Kaya comic, is it open to like go a little bit more into the past, or do we have to be, if we're doing Korra era, it has to be like during Korra? Like, is it a locked in thing where like whatever story we're getting here has to be during one of the main events of Korra? Like I said earlier on, like, does it have to be X character during the Equalist takeover of the city? Does it have to be this character in Zaofu, you know, during the Red Lotus attack or something like that? It's a bit kind of unclear. Gap between Korra book 3 and 4. Actually, yeah, that's a good place to tell a story, because there is untold stories with quite a few of the characters there. That's certainly one thing to do. But yeah, we'll get into this. Like I said, I have stuff about some of the characters, but I actually want to start with the continuity stuff. In a way, just to get it out of the way and kind of highlight like what actually happened here with this book. So, for the most part, in terms of mistakes, the only real one that's kind of notable is the whole Pao is called Feng in this book, and they double down on it because they say no Pao family member worked at the shop. And then you watch, I think it's in like Lao Guy, I think at the start, the guy who gives Iroh the Jasmine Dragon literally calls him Pao by name. And you immediately ask the question of like, how was this not caught? Because in terms of sort of research for this book, for the most part, you are watching probably 3 episodes. City of Walls and Secrets, Tales of Ba Sing Se, and Lake Lao Guy. They're your main Ba Sing Se episodes, especially in terms of kind of super heavy direct overlap with Jin kind of as we know her. In terms of like the stuff where you're messing around with Lee and Mushi and stuff like that. How do you miss a detail like this from what happens here? And it speaks to like, how does this process actually work? Because I think we've seen now in interviews, every single author mention at some point that, oh, how do you work on the books? And they're like, oh, I did my research, I read stuff, I watched stuff, I even used Avatar Wiki. I think a lot of them have said stuff like that. And there's always been the kind of counter question that I want to ask in terms of like, are you not given any direction by Avatar Studios on like, hey, for what you're doing, here's all the relevant material that you probably should familiarize yourself with? Or do they want to allow the author to be more free with that? So they're just kind of like, hey, you do your own stuff. Trust us to catch any errors that you make. As mentioned in the chat there, the Barnes & Noble exclusive version of this book, I even noted kind of down here. Where is it here? Yeah. Extra content is showing us some of this back and forth approvals process. But obviously they take snapshots of that where it clearly sort of works, where they highlight like, oh, here's one time where it didn't quite go right and we had to correct some stuff. Here's some terminology stuff that we corrected. Like they corrected, for instance, like she used the word magic at some point in the book, but like you don't do that in Avatar. They wanted the final scene of the book heavily extended, basically, the final fight, that sort of stuff. But of course, the really interesting stuff coming out of this is the failings of this process. What was actually sent back and forth when it came to stuff like the name of that manager? Did Judy Lin come up with that name? Because that comes from nowhere. Nowhere else is this character called Feng. So that had to have come from Avatar Studios. That like... I'm guessing the way that probably would have to work is either she knew the character's name was Pao, put him in as Pao. Maybe it is actually an official retcon by Avatar Studios that they want the character to be named Feng, and that's just what happened. And they just didn't really tell anyone. Or she just didn't know what the name was. Avatar Studios made the mistake of like, oh, the manager of the shop's name is this, because of this reason, and then it's like, wait, what? And it's them making the mistake. I don't really know how that really kind of comes about. So it makes me kind of question a little bit, like, what's the author looking at to get this information in terms of like, okay, like in this case, it's just the name of an exceptionally minor character. Fundamentally, there's no continuity that's like inherently broken just because they named the character the wrong thing. Like this could have been worse, of course. Like I think the comment mistake from the Roku book is a little bit of a worse mistake because it's such an important date and kind of year to kind of get right. Whereas this is like, okay, you forgot the manager of the tea shop's name. It is what it is. But also, how did this happen? That's the sort of idea here. And it brings up the question, like, is this a retcon? As in, like, we just have no way to really know inherently right now. Like, is it an official mistake? Or are they actually retconning this character to being called Feng, even though the show says the character's name is Pao? It does feel like a mistake that just was not caught at any point in the process, and it just kind of snuck through. Now it speaks to what is the criteria as they read through the book in terms of checking some of these details and stuff like that, because it feels like you give this book to a certain section of the fandom and every single one of them is catching this mistake, yet the professionals involved in this who work for Avatar Studios didn't catch it, and it's just a little bit of a weird one, ultimately. So that's that. A little bit of poor research, perhaps, followed by some lax approvals. Effectively, what seems to have happened with the error from the Roku book, where what seems to have happened there is just that Randy Rabai just really, I guess, quickly tried to calculate the time, put it down, and I guess the approvals just went, well, that's a specific number. He must have it right. Let's not even check that. That's just one of those things where I'm not kind of super sure about. Mike and Brian. And this is the thing. My guess is Mike and Brian are not involved in these approvals. I really don't think Mike and Brian are involved in the approvals for this book. I think Mike and Brian, in terms of a book like this, probably are minimally involved in terms of just a thing we would like to release is a novel about Jin where this rough thing happens. And then I think for the most part they're probably not super involved in the rest of the process. Nor do I think they really should be. I think this is a mistake I think a lot of fans have when it comes to Mike and Brian, is assuming that they should have encyclopedic knowledge of all things Avatar at all times. In the interview that they had recently for the Braving the Elements Book 2 kind of preview kind of episode, yeah, Mike and Brian basically said that they don't know the names of a lot of the extra avatars that kind of we know. And I'm kind of like, yeah, that tracks. I don't expect Mike off the top of his head to be able to tell Janet and Dante about Avatar Goon. I don't think they have to kind of know that information, because from Mike's perspective, he maybe assisted with that detail going into that book like 3-4 years ago. And we haven't had Avatar Goon content basically since then. And then the other factor here is that he's working on all the new stuff as well. So he's got Avatar Pavi stuff in his head, older Aang content in his head, potentially a new Water Avatar content in his head. They're the overseers. And again, the whole point is that with Avatar Studios, they now have people at Avatar Studios whose jobs is basically to edit / check the books for kind of continuity. They're meant to have at least one person who works at the studio that is there for these type of errors and situations like that. It's their job to catch those intricate details, not Mike and Brian. Where that's like a silly question. Like I someone would get in trouble at Avatar Studios if you went to Mike and Brian and asked, like, what's the name of the manager at the tea shop called? That's more for someone else to do. That's kind of what we're doing here. And that just seems to be part of the problem, is that, like, whatever way this is working, and I don't know how that role particularly works, it's creating some problems. But again, it's not like there are, I think, giant problems constantly slipping through. We're at the situation where there's like one error that ultimately is just like a smallish mistake, and then maybe some other things where it's like, did you forget about this potentially, but it's not a giant error, that sort of thing. So there's that. So that's the mistake. Then the other angle on this is the like purposeful retcons, where they clearly were aware of this information, factored it in completely, but realized that they had to make some changes to make this work, because they're telling a story that is like 1,000,000 times more in-depth than the 2 entries on the old Nickelodeon website that have information about Jin and her parents. So that's what happens here. the old Nick website information on Jin, her parents' background, the fire fountain, does get moved around a bit. But notably, they try to keep as much of it in place as possible. Like the sort of romantic inspiration influence in her life is still absolutely there. The significance of the fountain, a fountain, is still there. It's just that whereas the old website information says her parents are alive, the story they wanted to tell required her to have a kind of not so stable kind of situation in the city, and so they made some changes basically. And they wanted, Susu and her family to give her the stability, not Jin's own family. And also, I think the other factor with the old website information is also the messiness with that old website information itself, where we have this stuff like where it directly says Jin and her parents are refugees, but her parents like met in Ba Sing Se when they were younger, and then it's like, what are we doing here? Where that's a complicated one by itself, where it's like, well, if they were in Ba Sing Se and just had Jin, do you still call Jin a refugee if she's born while like they've always been in the city? So it means like her parents had to at some point leave Ba Sing Se together and then go back as refugees. And it's like, okay, we're keeping the refugee part. That's key to Jin's story. And we're adjusting some of this information because what was written on the website is a little odd. You can make what's on the website work, but that's a case where it's like, actually, I think they made some clever-ish decisions ultimately. That's kind of my thoughts on a lot of what they kind of did here. Because ultimately that's the idea. It's just like, we never really knew much about Jin's parents. The detail that's actually notable about her parents is still in the book about the fire fountain, their romance inspiring Jin. It's just that they're not around in the present day, though we never saw them in the present day. The fountain detail, again, being a thing where, like, okay, because of that, there then has to be a fountain in Da Ying, where they're from, and there's a similar one in Ba Sing Se. It's fine. That makes sense. So the Avatar Studios do have an approvals process there. The writer can do a good amount of research to work with that stuff. And that's where I wanted to see in the back of the Barnes & Noble edition. Show us that process. Taking that older lore and adapting it to, we're actually telling a full novel about Jin as a character. That's what I really want to see. Like, how did that truly come about in terms of like how much of that was Judy Lin and how much of that was like Avatar Studios kind of making those kind of key decisions, that sort of thing. So that's that. Then the other angle on this is just content about Jin not being acknowledged when it probably should be. And that's the comic Going Home Again. Now, interestingly, it does get referenced because this is the only place prior to this book where the whole Supreme Bureaucratic Administrator title is given to one of the Judys. So them having that in this book is a direct reference to Going Home Again. But they seem to ignore the fact that Jin meets Lee again in this comic. And nothing in the book references this. Technically, the book never really contradicts the comic fully. There are gaps where it could fit in, but there are one or two lines of dialogue where, not dialogue, just in the book, where Jin kind of refers back to Lee. And it's clear that like the scene from Going Home Again should have happened, and there's no acknowledgement that she has met him again. So you can't fully say they've retconned that book out. It feels like they just kind of forgot about it to a certain degree. And then it's like, wait, what happened here? Like, did you get the Judy title because you went to like the Avatar wiki on the Judy thing, so you got that reference, but you maybe never went into the detail about Jin has another appearance in a piece of content? I don't really know how that kind of really happens. And yeah, was the comic ever brought up anywhere in the process from, I don't know, Judy Lin, from the creative team at Avatar Studios? Was it purposefully ignored? Like, this is another point that is kind of interesting as well, is the idea of, because what they will be doing in that case is, like, if they did that scene directly, it would be adapting a scene in novel from a different publisher, taking a scene from a comic from a different publisher. Are they allowed to do that? I assume they probably are, but like, in that, like, I can't see Dark Horse really having an issue necessarily with that, because it would be such a small part of the book ultimately. But why? When you directly adapted so many other points, what was the issue with this one here? I can see how potentially, like, tonally you felt that, like, oh, this is a hard thing to kind of work around at that point in time. But especially when you have Jin mostly undercover with a little bit of freedom, you have time for that scene to happen. Ultimately, you have time to, in a way, fully resolve the Lee thing, that, like, it was never, like, really going to be anything more than that first date, that whole idea. But yeah, it is just some small things in the grand scheme of it, in that you can't say for sure that this book is just not canon anymore. You can't say for sure what the situation is over here. And then there is so much good continuity overall done. It's just, we need to be a little bit better behind the scenes at Avatar Studios in terms of making this stuff happen. And I don't know whether that is the Avatar Studios need to almost help bring some of the writers maybe up to speed on, here's all the key information, or if it's actually Avatar Studios who need to be brought up to speed with, like, relevant information for specific characters, that sort of thing. And I that's where I'd really like to know the creative process, not behind that one paragraph where you had a very, very easy fix that you published in the book, but situations where it was more complicated and interesting overall. So, that out of the way, let's get into some of the characters. Obviously, there's a lot to talk about with Jin, obviously the main character in the book. I believe I have, a bit of a kind of broad overview of her character here, just because it is the main character. How did they construct the book around a character where her only main appearance is such a specific thing that, like, the only content effectively is her date with Zuko, and effectively a follow-up to that date in a comic. That tonally Jin is presented in roughly the same way in both of these situations. You have so much space to work with outside of, like, Jin in a romantic environment. Like, you know nothing about what's going on in, like, effectively the rest of her life. So there's so much that they can do. The actual use of the date, I think, is quite interesting in the book, because I think this is a pretty interesting point, that, like, the date both is and isn't representative of who Jin is as a character, because they frame this moment when we finally get to it in the book as Jin, in a way, forcing herself to kind of go through some character development herself. She's aware she has to prove to herself something by going on this date. So she's kind of not quite her usual self, but in a way has to kind of bring out more of her usual self. So it's an interesting kind of point here where we get, like, a very different Jin prior to this scene in the book. Afterwards, you can say maybe she's more, like, overall like this, but it's a clever kind of use of this overall. And this is where they do bring up, in a way, kind of the character flaw for Jin as presented in the early part of the book, where she kind of gives off this impression to people that she's maybe not a friendly or approachable person. She kind of keeps to herself. She's disagreeable to a certain degree. And the characters who say this are almost presented as being wrong, but she ultimately has to accept that, like, actually, I can see where you were coming from, given the way I was in certain situations, how I acted, that sort of thing. And she has to be like, no, on this date with Lee, I will show that I'm not that disagreeable person, which is why she is, like, particularly kind of bubbly on that date, which is not like her usual self, and she kind of in a way forces herself to be a bit more outgoing than usual, more like Susu is, which is I think an interesting angle on things. The other point about the date is also that, like, because this is her only like scene prior to this book, do you make the date the central core of her character, or just a moment that happened? And I think they correctly make this a moment that happened that is kind of important to her, but it's not the most important thing in her life to her. And I think they actually make that work really, really kind of cleverly throughout this book, because they delve into the idea of, like, yeah, the date is meant to highlight, one, she is a bit of a romantic at heart. She would like a relationship. You know, she wants a relationship that's kind of like her parents and has hope that maybe something could happen with Lee. Two, there is this angle of, like, she wants on the date to kind of show that not all Fire Nation people are bad. This event from her past, where this comes to pass, is there a second time to prove that again? And actually, yes, this is one of the main takeaways from this, is that, like, you know, she actually goes in basically suspecting his Fire Nation. The scene with the lights confirms it to her, basically. And that's why she doesn't freak out, is because she kind of had in her head that this is the way it was probably going to go. So that's cool. And then, yeah, the more personal character arc of, like, prove that she isn't someone who is difficult to interact with. And all of these things are kind of things that she proves to herself on this date. But actually, her arc has all this other stuff going on. Like, initially at the very start of the book, we have, like, her dealing with, like, she's going to the academy. She has to look after her grandfather. She has to help at the bakery, and other kind of little bits and pieces, because the lower ring is a difficult place to live in, even though she has a support structure with the Wen family. She then has to, of course, deal with the sudden change in her life when Susu, the kind of inciting incident of the book, happens. Susu takes the contract to save the bakery, and this means that kind of Jin has to take up a little bit more of a role. She wants to take up more of a role at the bakery to kind of protect Susu's family for her. But then also, this is what brings the other part of the plot into play. Jin now needs money to pay off Susu's contract, and so this brings the Silver Fang plot into play, while she still has all this other stuff going on. And that's kind of what the book is really actually about from Jin's perspective. But then, you know, you get a very kind of like normal life in Ba Sing Se kind of stuff going on here, especially early on in the book. You don't have the obvious connections into the main ATLA plot, but then you realize, wait, this is ATLA. This is that Ba Sing Se plot. Those big plot beats are going to affect Jin's story. And so you get the moments in the book where, yeah, the Fire Nation takes Ba Sing Se, and that just happens. And how does that affect someone who just lives in the city? We saw the crazy fights where that happened, and kind of casually in a way covered, and now the city's been taken over. But here we see the effect of that, what it actually does to the normal people. You know, we see her discovering the Dai brainwashing, that you can't just pay the contract off because, hey, she's been brainwashed and is involved in something bigger than that. And then, of course, like I highlighted earlier, the eclipse coming into play here, the comet, the fact that she's involved in all these things to a certain degree, on kind of different angles, is interesting, because, of course, by the time these are happening, our main team is in, like, the Fire Nation. But here we see, like, the Earth Kingdom while these things are happening. We saw bits and pieces of that, like Boomy took back his city during the eclipse. Here was an attempt for a more personal goal happening during the eclipse to try and get Susu back. That's a very clever kind of use of the timing with the ATLA story. That's really, really cool. But yeah, the start of the book obviously is the introduction basically to Susu, what Jin's situation is. We really quickly kind of highlight that, yeah, these two just came together very quickly after Jin came to the city and have basically been like sisters ever since. She is full on incorporated into the Wen family after this. And I do like that there is a sense that in quite a bit of the lower ring, not all of it, that people are kind of just like this. Like, they will just help people out and stuff like that. Sure, don't go down that alley at that point in time. You don't want to go there. But there is some structure to the lower ring, and I like that they got that kind of community aspect apart. Another kind of interesting part as well in this book is also that you kind of highlight that the middle and the lower rings are a little bit more interconnected than we kind of maybe thought. It's not that difficult to go between them. It's just specific locations in the middle ring are kind of off limits. You need a pass to get in. That sort of idea. The backstory with what happened to her parents is pretty brutal. The way it's just so casually described. The reveal of like what happened to Jin's mother is like one of the more brutal descriptions. Like, given that this book doesn't get like overly violent with like most of what it does, given that we have like the Sozin's Comet fight at the end, we'll get there. This is definitely one of the more like, whoa, Jin saw her mother's body after what happened. That's kind of crazy. And her father never made it out of the city. So this is what happened to her parents. She comes to Ba Sing Se with her grandfather, Gong Gong. He was injured along the way in a rock landslide. And then you get this other moment, which references, you actually get this context during the date with Zuko, which is that they nearly got captured by Fire Nation soldiers, but two soldiers randomly, in a way, led them away from the main group of soldiers so that they wouldn't be captured. And this is why Jin doesn't absolutely hate all Fire Nation people and has some faith in people from the Fire Nation to a certain degree. That's a kind of nice move, given that you're going to like link Jin's arc in with Jet to a certain degree, with Smellerbee, Longshot. That's a nice point to get across why it's a little bit different for her compared to kind of other people. Jin is an earthbender. I've seen some reaction to this as people feeling like they made some mistake with this or something like that. We never knew if Jin was or wasn't an earthbender. We just assumed that she wasn't, because she's maybe more of a normal person. But I actually really like this reveal because it highlights that group of people in the Avatar world we don't see too often, which is that like they're benders, but they almost have very little reason within their life to pursue their bending as a skill. As in, Jin seems to have done some basic early training with her mother to get to the point where she has control over it, but she doesn't have skill beyond like some basic moves. And because of basically what happened to her mother, Gong Gong kind of is leading her down the path to not pursue her skills. And I do like that at the start, that this is important, that Jin is initially not going to be super useful in a fight because she only has the absolute basic training. She'll get to the point where she's decent, but she doesn't just become one of the most powerful benders in the series in this book. She gets to a solid point. And I think that's cool the way they kind of do that. Obviously, the Susu moment is a devastating thing to happen for Jin. I think it's chapter 4 where the two of them have their kind of sit down together on top of the roof of one of the houses, and they kind of talk about their dreams together. It's a really good scene to have to just get across like how integral they both are to each other's lives right before they're kind of ripped apart from each other. I think that is a really cool thing to have. But then we transition directly into the kind of Xuan relationship. This is cool because the initial interactions between these characters just go so wrong. Like, it's a disaster for the first, like, I think it's 3 encounters these characters have together before finally there's a little bit of an opening between the two of them. And it's interesting because I think first time through, you're very much on Jin's side completely, and it's like, oh, all these idiots like that she has to deal with, it made complete sense. But then you go back and realize that actually the arc they're trying to take you on with Jin is that she has almost prejudged them in almost a similar way that they're judging her from kind of different angles. She has a view of them as spoiled middle ring people, and they have a view of her as, you know, lower ring person. And it's just those two things kind of clashing, along with just other situations. Like you see with Xuan in particular, that the influence of some of his friends kind of caused some of this issue in his initial interactions with Jin. Along with that, later on in the book, you get the idea that he's always kind of had his eye on her, as in, like, they almost reveal that he's had a crush on her for a while, and so he gets embarrassed in some of these early situations, and that maybe doesn't help things as well. But you do see as it goes on, he does actually kind of, in some of these scenes, he goes out of his way to try and be better, try and explain things to her, and highlight that there wasn't really too much going on. Like, you see that he even gets rid of Jiang from his friend group after what Jiang says to her, because he was the one who really annoyed Jin in that situation and caused the issue. But he realized that, oh, he's the one with the high connections in the Earth Kingdom. You have to be more delicate with how you handle, you know, disagreeing with him. And that's the kind of interesting angle here. You know, he's not really aware of her situation, but, like, you know, you didn't tell him. And she actually almost keeps it from Xuan for quite a bit of the book, to the point where he gets very frustrated a little bit later on in the book that, you know, I've kind of gone out of my way for you like a few times now, and you still won't trust me enough to say, like, why you're doing this. I might actually be able to help you a little bit more. She's a little bit too kind of stuck in her ways almost, and won't just open the door to him. And it takes her going through, like, having the scene with Mushi at the tea shop where he gives her the kind of big advice. It takes her being confronted with the idea of, like, wait, other people find me disagreeable? No, actually, wait, that might be true. I need to be better. I will be better on this date with Lee. And she comes out of that actually now able to approach the dynamic with Xuan more properly. And from there, the relationship actually becomes something that actually begins to work, and you see the kind of attraction begin to form, and they have little scenes together, obviously disrupted by the big plot beats happening time after time again, but you see them gradually come together. I think it's a really nice, like, simple with a little bit of drama relationship that just comes together, I think, really nicely. You don't expect it to maybe go there after the initial scene, but it goes to the right places, I think, overall. So that's an interesting point. Getting into some of her deliveries, like the Professor thing, I suppose, like, this is one I really want to find out what people's thoughts are on this in chat. What do you make of the whole Professor thing with the, what is it, wood turned to stone, the whole philosophy angle they had on that? Because this begins to bring in a situation where this is just confusing when you read it for the first time. When you come back to it with the context of what the Silver Fangs are, it's suddenly like, wait, is Professor in the White Lotus? Is that what we're getting at here? Or is he sort of like someone who is aware of the White Lotus and works with them? There's a lot of characters in this book where you're like, are they directly a member of the Order of the White Lotus, or are they just like, we help the White Lotus? He's kind of the first of them because he immediately senses that she's an earthbender. She never tells him that. The immediate thing of, this is her first delivery, and immediately she's almost being tested. Like, hey, do you want to see what's in the package? That sort of idea. tell them they have my vote when it's needed and stuff like that. And the whole idea of like, yeah, don't become stagnant, still be willing to change. And it's pretty intriguing overall. And he trusted that the youth is going to be where the kind of change like truly happens, which ends up kind of being, I suppose, the case, because we sort of highlight Jin, Xuan, that group as like they lead the change on the other side of the battle at the end of the book to retake Ba Sing Se type thing. It's a prediction that like the youth will kind of win the day, and it ends up actually coming true. It's quite clever, I think. After this, like immediately after this, on the way back, her first encounter with Susu, which is actually the little segment they have on the back of the book. Interesting, where you get, of course, that last line there, my friend sounds like someone else. And it's a really clever, sudden reveal of like she just suddenly comes across Susu and is shocked by the idea of, why wouldn't she talk to me? We know what the situation is. Why is she talking like a robot almost with a different accent? She's become a Judy. But of course, for someone like Jin, who has no context of that ever being a thing, Jin just thinks, has something like bad happened where she is afraid to talk to me. She settles at a certain point in the book on the idea of like, no, she must have been trying to protect me by acting like she doesn't know me, kind of because of class dynamics almost. And it's only like halfway through the book basically that Smellerby and Longshot actually tell her, oh yeah, the Dai Li engage in brainwashing. That sounds exactly like what happened to Jed. And that's where she realizes, oh, a lot of what I'm doing in this first stage of the book kind of wasn't ever going to actually free Susu. And it's a clever way to kind of bring things into play of like Jin thinks that she's just trying to solve an unfortunate issue, but a unfortunate issue that sometimes happens in the city, to no, actually this is going to bring you into like everything overall. And it is one of the coolest things in the book is the Susu Judy thing. It was fun because I think I kind of called this from the initial kind of description for the book. So I was on this like immediately because it felt like such a clever plot to do. And also a clever use of continuity, because this was a sort of unresolved plot point in ATLA itself, where in Lake Laogai we walk past the room where they're kind of teaching the Judis, brainwashing the Judis, but we never showed the gang freeing them or anything like that. So this resolves the idea of like, oh yeah, Jin and her team along the way deal with this plot point in addition to just undoing an individual person's brainwashing. It's kind of cool. And then, yeah, this is some of the stuff I mentioned earlier on. After this, she refuses to tell Xuan about Susu because of the kind of previous incidents. She has her big chat with Mushi, which is actually a quite cool scene where, like, because she doesn't really know that he's Fire Nation at this point or anything like that, he just flat out is like, oh yeah, I used to be a royal, basically. I had everything, and I didn't realize what I really had until I lost the most important thing to me, referencing kind of Lu Ten. And just kind of telling her to effectively, like, you know, make the best of the circumstances that you have. And the idea that, like, that's probably what Susu's doing, so I need to do the same. And that's the whole point. Yeah, it is kind of crazy. Yeah, they do kind of reveal a somewhat decent plot point, because this is like chapter 9 or 10, isn't it? When that reveal happens. So it's a decent-ish bit into the book, like before you get to it. But it is one of the more notable ones. But it speaks to the idea of like I maintain, I don't think they've marketed any of these books particularly well in quite a while. And this one, I suppose, in particular, I'm not sure they did the best job of kind of just getting that across. A lot of it comes down to, I think, the official Avatar channels doing very minimal stuff with the book, when I think you know, why don't they just get Judy Lin on that week's podcast, the week the book comes out? Why don't they just do an interview with Judy Lin on the Avatar Legends YouTube channel that day? Not a short, a proper video, and just highlight the book, talk about it, have it be a very like structured, scripted interview almost. It doesn't have to be like a live chat kind of back and forth. Just get across like key points to people, more casual fans, subscribe to that channel, why you should read this book. Go into some of those spoilers, like, highlighting bits and pieces that, like, hey, what does this mean? Make the connection. They can show the clips on the official YouTube channel, that sort of thing. Highlight that some of the characters you'll meet in this book, Smellerby and Longshot. I understand why, to a certain degree, they're cool spoilers to have when you get to that point in the book, but it's also like the selling point of the book is what characters are in it, which is cool because her second delivery is to Madame Mokmu Ling, who I did not in any way call that they would do something like this, but it actually makes a lot of sense with what they're trying to do here, where this is probably the most obvious example of like what the Silver Fangs are trying to do here, where like these are these kind of somewhat fancy institutes in the kind of like upper ring kind of thing, where you wouldn't expect Mokmu Ling, with how kind of stuck up she comes across, to care at all about the lower ring. But actually, part of what she's doing here is almost trying to test these girls who she gets to do her kind of illicit kind of international deliveries from. And it's clear that, like, okay, she has strict like criteria for what she's looking for from these girls, but actually she's like, yeah, I don't care if you come from the lower ring. If you have the skills that I want, I will, show interest in you. But you also get to see a slightly different side of her as well. Like she pulls the knife on Jin at the end of one of the chapters if she doesn't get the answer that she wants. Again, it's interesting because they allude to the idea of she's White Lotus adjacent. Like, I don't think she's actually part of the Order of the White Lotus, but she clearly is someone who knows what that is to a certain degree. And that's interesting, because this is also, they also use this as the sort of, I suppose, full proof within the book that Jin isn't disagreeable, because she can prove herself to someone super picky like Mokmu Ling, who even gives her the haiku about herself that kind of calls her like gifted and so on. And it's like, okay, I just had a bad time for a while. I probably should have been more open with the rest of the class, but it's not actually that big of a problem. It's a nice kind of a moment overall. And it's obviously one of those weird ones where, like, Mokmu Ling is one of those characters as well who, like, what portion of the fan base actually knows that this character was named that from that episode? You remember, oh yeah, the woman that Sokka did the haiku battle with, but like she's not named in that episode or anything like that. But it's cool. And now obviously she has her own magic card as well, which is quite fun. So yeah, that's that whole situation there. This is then, at the end of this job, she again refuses to be open with Chuen, but this time he storms off on his own, and kind of correctly so, in that, like, what's preventing her from actually kind of coming kind of clean about this at this point. But then the date is just about to happen. Is it the first time we know her name is Mokmu Ling? No. We do get that from... is it Lost Lore? Is Mokmu Ling Lost Lore where we get the name from? It might be Avatar Extras. It's one of those ones where, like, the origin of her name is kind of like a weird one where, like, is it the credits of the episode maybe names her? Might be Avatar extras. I don't know off the top of my head where her name specifically comes from. Let me just check. Does the wiki have any obvious references to this? Avatar extras. Okay, that might be it. Yeah, Avatar extras. It says that the teacher is Madame Mokmu Ling. Yeah. Okay. So that's I guess originally where it comes from. It takes me so long to check if it comes from the credits, but Avatar extras. So they kept that. That's cool. And again, that's one of those details where like that feels like a manager Fung type error where they could have got that wrong. Because just off the top of our heads here, yeah, where does that name originally come from? You don't get that from the episodes. But I guess because she's one of the more notable characters in one of the Tales of Ba Sing Se, they kind of felt like, okay, we got to make sure we get this character's name down if she has a name. So they checked that one, I guess, at least. So that's interesting. And then, yeah, the date from Jin's perspective is fascinating because she wants to prove herself that she can like be herself without Susu around. Can it be the start of something meaningful like her kind of parents have? She does have her suspicions from seeing the Jet fight earlier on that he might be Fire Nation. She doesn't just dismiss the fact that Jet accuses Zuko of being Fire Nation. So that is an interesting kind of point in this. She does question herself, like, what is she hoping to get out of this? Is she forcing things just to kind of prove herself or what? So she kind of engineers the situation at the fountain of just like, if there is a connection, it will happen here. And, we do get that, yeah, she basically knows. When she opens her eyes and the fountain is lit, having not previously been lit, she basically knows he's a firebender at that point. And the reason she doesn't freak out is because of the soldiers who didn't report her. Which I think is a very clever way to do this. That this is why it's just normal for her. Like, she doesn't have the freak out moment because this is not one of the people who, killed her parents, who invaded her hometown. This is someone else who also has a scar on their face, that sort of thing. And interestingly, from Jin's perspective, she realizes towards the end, this is not her destined romance, and the kiss from her perspective is just meant to be a kind of almost a kiss goodbye. And she gets surprised when he kisses back and then suddenly leaves, and is just happy in the kind of aftermath of all of this to just have done something normal, and that went well for her. And this is what gives her the confidence to go forward, pursue working with Xuan, of course. I'll cut over to Smelly and Longshot because this is effectively when they get introduced properly. So this is cool. This is very clever. This is one of the best parts of the book in my mind. Is these are our main cameo characters, effectively. The most sort of well-known of the characters that we kind of actually utilize in the book is, the two freedom fighters here who are the ones who aren't present at other points in the story where the freedom fighters are kind of later on. We see the Duke and stuff like that and Pipsqueak at different points, but not these two, the other kind of main two. And we only see them again after their role in like Laogai and stuff like that in The Promise in the comics. So one thing that we get here is sort of the resolution to their arcs. We finish their story with them defending a dying Jet, but where do they go from there? And this is what we actually do get to see here. So yeah, they kind of get to finish their arc in the show here. we get to see just before and kind of just after their roles in book 2 that, like Jin, becomes an initiate with the Silver Fangs. Also, Smellerby and Longshot become initiates with the Silver Fangs. Kind of they've done it like just prior to Jin joining, and they're also, I suppose, more like kind of operatives because they're freedom fighters, so they're a little bit more kind of skilled overall. So this is obviously what they're up to after Jet gets arrested, which is a kind of cool reveal just by itself. And she gets paired up with them for the trials, and kind of they're basically a team for the rest of the book, which is kind of cool. Like the main team, you would say, is like, yeah, by the end of the book, it's Jin, Schwen, Smellerby, and Longshot as our kind of 4 kind of teammates here, which is very cool. Obviously, at various points, like Longshot gets injured for a little bit. He's not really involved. At a certain point, the Smellerby and Longshot hold back, and it's just Jin and Schwen. But they get to be involved here for quite a bit, which I think works very, very well. The story, this is pretty brutal as well. The story of how they get Jet's body out of the Lake Laogai base. This is also why they kind of know the layout so well, is because, yeah, they had a bit of a challenge getting out kind of at the end of all of this. There's a few weird details about, like, even though she talks to them at length about Jet, we never get a moment of realization from Jin where she realizes Jet was the guy that Lee was fighting. It's a little bit of a like, huh? Should that not have been like something that became clear at a certain point? It doesn't super matter. It's just there was a clear opportunity where it felt like the dots should connect at this point, but no reaction. Okay. So there's that. We do get backstories, very quick, like 1-line backstories for Smellerby and Longshot, of like Smellerby's family farmed in the mountains north of Gaipan, near Taku, before it was attacked by the Fire Nation. Longshot's village fell to attacks by Fire Nation archers, and this is why he took up the bow, to prove he could best the archers that ruined his life. And I like these. I do wish we had maybe got like a little bit more on these two, just in terms of like new kind of important information. To a certain degree, I would actually say that maybe the one thing that I was kind of missing from the book was almost just the reveal of like, hey, are Smellerby and Longshot a couple? Are we meant to have that interpretation, or is that like just, shipping kind of stuff? Because there are moments where it's like, okay, like Smellerby is really, really upset that Longshot might be really badly injured, might be killed. And it's like, okay, this is a normal enough reaction if they're just close friends, almost family. But also, this would make sense if they're a couple and they never quite go in that direction. And it's like, I wouldn't mind if you did it. I wouldn't really mind if you didn't. It's just like, there was an opportunity to confirm Smellershot, and they kind of didn't quite take it. But overall, given that it wasn't their book, I like the involvement here, because they become close with Jin and kind of Schwen over the course of this. You see that like Smellerby and Schwen kind of don't initially get on like super well, but like it gets to a point where they all kind of trust each other, because he helps Longshot to take care of his leg when he gets injured and stuff like that. The big point for them, this is why it's important that they're in the book, is that they bring the information from like the main part of the story. They're the ones to be like, hey, we just saw your interaction with Susu. She's been brainwashed like Jet was brainwashed. You're going to have to get involved in this in a bigger way to make this happen. We will help you. We're friends now. We will go with you to Lake Laogai to hopefully try and get Susu out, because this is the moment in the book where it gets confirmed. You won't be able to pay off her contract. You have to take her back, basically. That's the only way that this is going to work. And also, you are going to have to talk to her to try and break the brainwashing when it actually does happen. So that's a really, really interesting point as it happens. We do get their initial kind of training little arc here where Xuen teaches Jin some precision earthbending to open like secret locks behind walls, which is cool because you get to reveal that Xuen is actually like a pretty good precision earthbender, though he's not like super kind of power focused. That's a moment where they kind of have a little bit of kind of an early romantic closeness kind of moment as the kind of mission actually ends up going quite well. You see that it was a bit of a trick. They thought they were doing an actual mission, but it was actually like a bit more of an actual training mission. This is probably where we should bring in the leaders of the Silver Fangs. So we have two of them. We have Aunt Sumi and Patron Wu. So Aunt Sumi is the main leader. She seems to be the character who you would actually say is actually a member of the Order of the White Lotus, though I think they're very vague about like how many people involved in all of this are actual White Lotus members versus who are just like on the outskirts kind of and are associated with the White Lotus. I think she in particular, because she seems to kind of facilitate a lot of the big moves, feels like she's kind of skillful enough at so many kind of aspects that like, okay, yeah, she's part of Owl. I think it makes sense for her. Patron Wu, maybe. It's hard to say because we don't get much on Patron Wu as the book goes on. There's the main scene with them, but then afterwards they're just referred to just like once or twice, having facilitated something in the background type thing. But yeah, this is cool. Like this is the character known as the Judge, referenced quite early in the book as the character who facilitated the deal between the Wen family and the people who kind of took over the bakery initially. So that's the kind of connection as we kind of get into this part of the book. So you can see like Aunt Sumi heavily involved in kind of making connections between the different rings of the city, but also that like, yeah, the eventual reveal with the Silver Fangs is that it is this, it's not it is a criminal organization, I guess, because they are technically breaking rules of bossing say, but they don't do anything that is like, is more than just like, yeah, some of these rules are a bit like in bossing say. They break those ones, but they don't break some of the like the bigger ones. It's more like, yeah, it's the Robin Hood type thing where like they're what they're doing isn't really hurting anyone. They're actually helping people in the higher rings of the city to have connections to the lower rings of the city. And it actually helps facilitate like deals in the lower ring. Wealth goes down to the lower ring to help. And this is why there's actually a certain amount of structure in the lower ring. And it feels like without the Silver Fangs, the lower ring would actually be a terrible place to live. Which is a very cool reveal when it actually happens. Obviously, when we're getting towards the end of it's basically like part 2 we're getting towards the end of, the invasion hits, and she basically says, one gate's open, tons of people move to immediately get out of the city. But everyone else is basically like, keep your heads down, maybe something will happen in the future. And we set up just the idea of like, what's going on here? Are the Silver Fangs just disbanding at this point? But you realize much later on in the book, it's actually this kind of very clever plan to kind of fake complete destruction of the group so we can come back later incorporated into the Dai Li and actually facilitate a counterattack much later on in the series. Patron Wu is the singer, best performer in the city. And yeah, other than like once or twice being referenced, I don't really have too much to say about this character. To the point where like it's almost like, did you need to have like a whole thing with like, we have 2 leaders of the Silver Fangs? Like, would it have worked just as well with just the one? like, I get it, you kind of, I guess, needed Onsumi as like the almost the public face of the Silver Fangs, who quote unquote betrays everyone at the end, and then someone working in the background. So you needed kind of a second person at a certain point, but like not super involved as the book kind of goes on to a certain degree. At this point, we'll go into Gong Gong, who we haven't touched on too much. Because it's at this point in the book, we get the death of Gong Gong as like the big kind of moment that marks like the end of like part 2 of the book to a certain degree. The thing with him, of course, is we find out that, you know, her parents don't make it to Ba Sing Se. He's the only member of the family that actually makes it with Jin to Ba Sing Se. But he gets injured along the way. He saves Jin and I think another person from a rock slide. The obvious injury which he gets treated for is the broken leg he gets in the middle of this. But the untreated injury is that he also hits his head in the middle of this. And it's actually the head injury that's the bigger kind of thing, actually, that goes a bit undiagnosed until much, much, much later on. But after this, we see that his condition is changeable. It seems to be kind of dementia-like symptoms here, where some days he is his usual self, the master calligrapher, Jin's grandfather, who can kind of watch over her. Other days, he still thinks that like his daughter Biu is alive and that Jin is Biu. And it highlights that this is something that Jin has to deal with, is just that she has to look after her grandfather more so than the other way around. And it's interesting because like you can see he does have an influence on her life where he wants her to go down this path as a master calligrapher because she's good at it too. This is why she's in the academy, to kind of pursue skills like this. He specifically doesn't want her to pursue her earthbending after what happened to Biu, which I think makes sense, even if Jin herself deep down understands that, like, hey, my father was basically in an administration role, kind of somewhat using calligraphy skills, and he didn't make it out of this situation either. So did it really matter in the end if something that bad happens? But you can see where his care kind of comes from. And it's just this kind of sad situation where you see that, you know, Jin has a family member, she cares about him, but then there are some days where it's like he isn't really there. But then the invasion happens right at the end. She goes back to kind of look after him, and we see immediately that he's having these kind of heart issues. It's hard to maybe tell exactly because they never just say what exactly happened to him. But like, if it reads like while she's kind of away that like he has like a heart attack. When he reads the invasion notice on the door, it seems like he has some sort of a heart attack like thing. He doesn't like immediately die here, but like it's serious. Later, when he is more stable, he's able to have what ends up being his final scene with Jin, where he tells her how proud he is of her, and you know, he's aware how much responsibility she has because of his unfortunate situation, and he wishes he could do more for her. And they kind of fall asleep together. It's like, oh, she had this nice moment when he was kind of fully there, and she thinks that there's more time, but during this night, like, he passes away. He's dead the next morning. And it's another one of these situations where it's a very, very sudden reveal how this happens, where like it's not a reveal as a cliffhanger to a chapter, it's a reveal like 2 sentences into the next chapter. So it actually is just as much of a surprise to us as it is Jin. And it's a tragic one because it's the loss of her last kind of known family member here. So she's kind of on her own to a certain degree, but and this is where the book is quite clever. She still has, of course, the rest of the Wen family, but also at this point in the book, this is the exact kind of transition point where Xuan has kind of gone from being minorly involved in her life to actually like he's quite important in her life. So that's kind of happening at the same time. But what they also do really well with the death of Gong Gong is how they kind of highlight the again, the community of the lower ring, the rituals that they have around kind of death, where they bury people as well. And I suppose we can tie this into the other burial scene that we get as well, that being of Jet with Smellerby and Longshot, where that happens first a little earlier, and then we get to see this happen with Gong Gong. The difference is that Gong Gong, I suppose, was a respected kind of member of the community, whereas no one really knew Jet. So Jet has the kind of burial mostly happen on his own, where it's just Smellerby, Longshot, and Jin. Here, the whole community comes together for him. Even though the invasion is still sort of happening, they still do it, where like they do the thing where like everyone helps kind of get the body to the burial site. Everyone helps bury, dig the grave a little bit. And then there's the candles out the window, I think it is, at the right time. And it's maybe the best moment that really gets across like the lower ring and what it's really about. There's this, and then of course there's the organization for the final battle, which is very cool. But this is, I think, maybe the more emotional one, where it just really comes together. The Weeping Hills is a kind of interesting concept as well, where like it's just, this is the way they have to do it in the lower rings. I'm not sure if they quite connect the dots enough to say like, is the Weeping Hills also where Liu Ten is buried, or is that just somewhere completely different? The description sort of works, but there's no real, I suppose, way to make it like massively clear that that's exactly kind of what they're doing. But yeah, this is nice. The moment with Jet it's really emotional, because you realize that like, yeah, that was a very sudden kind of moment, because we had to follow Team Avatar in Lake Laogai after Jet died. So we kind of just had to leave Jet dying there, and they actually do get their chance to bury him. And it is cool because, they're unsure. They've only recently met Jin, but they do kind of bring her in on this, and she kind of handles the situation kind of very well. Asks about like Jet afterwards. It's a nice resolution to Jet, and they also add on to that quite nicely at the end with who Jet, Smellerby, and everyone. Longshot, Smellerby, and everyone get to fight at the end as well. So that's really, really cool and interesting overall. Schwen, we've covered him gradually kind of as we go on here. Like I've covered quite a few of these kind of points here. I think the main thing just with his early appearances with him is just that, like, yeah, you could see some of the bad influence of some of his friends around him, but like he really quickly gets rid of Jiang from the group. And we say that like he actually remains friends with Renda, because he's actually perfectly fine in all of this, and actually just is honestly interested in helping out Jin, despite how some of the early scenes actually go. And we see that, yeah, while Jin is kind of in a bit of a daze after the death of Gong Gong, he is there for her to kind of really help her during everything that happens. The other big point, I think, during all of this is when Jin goes on her sort of crazy dash through the city during the invasion to get a doctor to Gong Gong. This actually inspires Schwen to kind of take action, and he remains kind of inspired for like basically the rest of the book. And he even says this to her later on, that this was this moment that kind of spurred him on into action. Just seeing how far she is willing to go, he will go that far as well. And yeah, this is the moment where they begin to really, really come together as a couple not quite yet, but they're getting there. They're getting there. Yeah, lots of repeating names. Yeah, that is a good point. I noticed that too. They've been doing that with the last few books as well. It was the same with Reckoning of Roku as well. That they're taking certain names from comics, from the RPG material. In this case, of course, from the Cabbage Merchant book as well. Some of them maybe feel a little bit more like clear cut than others, where some of them it's just like, yeah, that's a pretty standard name, don't mind them using that again. But yeah, other ones it's like, yeah, that makes sort of sense. Like, I don't mind, say, like Su Yin. We're actually naming one of our main characters in this book Su Yin. That was also the name of Su Yin from Korra, of course. But like, yeah, stuff like maybe the BU one, where that's referencing the quote-unquote villain character from Suki alone. That's definitely one of those ones where it's like, yeah, how'd you come up with that one? It feels like, is it a little bit on purpose at this point, or what? I don't know. It's interesting. But this is the point in the book where they go to the Dai Li base under Lake Laogai. Now, Longshot, of course, is injured during the invasion. He, quote-unquote, again, they're a bit vague about what exactly happens to his ankle. There's one point at which they almost seem to make it clear, like, oh yeah, he absolutely breaks his ankle. But then it's like, oh no, it's just a bad sprain. But then Xuan needs to come in and, like, relocate it. So it's like, huh? What happened here? Because to a certain degree, like with ankles, it's like a quote-unquote ankle dislocation feels like it's almost like a worse injury than like breaking it almost. But anyway, he has a bad ankle until the final battle, is the idea. So it has to be a 3-person job going to the Dai Li base. And we get some cool moments here, of course, where this is, it's still down there. They find it by not going through the entrance that Team Avatar went into. That was one entrance, which they kind of acknowledged in some of the details as they kind of go through this. But they find one of the, I suppose, bigger main entrances in. And, they meet some of the other Judees, of course. But notably, we get another one of our cameo character appearances here. And that is General Sung, which I thought was very, very interesting, the choice to have him be down here. And clearly, I think the reason they do this is because, at least in my mind, I see this as them wanting to kind of get the character a little bit back on track. He's meant to be a really notable character, but his appearance in like the episode The Drill makes him come across as this like idiot, incompetent character who doesn't have a clue what he's doing, when actually, there's no way he's a Council of 5 member and is this bad at like his job. So the takeaway after his appearance here is, I suppose, meant to be just that he really, really badly handles the drill. And can you blame him, given how crazy of a thing the drill was? He just absolutely lost it because of how big the drill was. Didn't know what to do. And actually, he's not that bad. But they also, at the same time, do kind of have him admit to like being aware that like, oh, even some of the Council of 5 members were like aware of like the use of the Judees. Not the full extent maybe of what exactly, or like how far they were going with it, but like was aware that they were doing some sort of brainwashing, and that it was just a normal thing, basically. The only kind of takeaway from this is just that he seems to not like that it's allowed in Bossing Say what the Dai Li do. But otherwise, he does kind of get to redeem himself a little bit here, where he's one of the main characters to really bring the idea of like, hey, do you know what happened about Aang? I met Aang. He's the one who tells them that, like, as far as I'm aware, Aang died just a little bit ago. it's an interesting one. He does tell them about the eclipse, and also he gets to do some kind of cool stuff, like off screen, like while they're figuring out what to do. He just like really gets to come across as like, oh yeah, there's a reason he's like a Council of Five member. Like he's really, really skilled. He's just like, oh yeah, I saw the supports while I was down here. I took a few of them out. And then he's just like, oh yeah, two of the guys escaped. I just got them. No problem. I'll cause some chaos up on the surface when we get out of here. And it's just like, he does it. And it's like, oh, like we see the kind of difference in kind of class here, in that like Jin and Xuan at this point in time are like, okay, supported by Smellerbee, who's a good non-bender fighter. But like, then you have like, actually General Sung is kind of here where we're at. You know, obviously Team Avatar is like all the way up here, but General Sung is actually pretty good, which is kind of fun. I do like the obsession with the freedom fighters with blasting jelly. That like the second they go on a mission, it's like Smellerbee's like, get me the blasting jelly, and they get to use it. Though they kind of acknowledge they didn't quite even need the blasting jelly, because General Sung did such a good job with his earthbending, taking out the structures of the Lake Laogai base. So General Sung, is the main reason the Lake Laogai base is underwater by the time we get to Korra Book 3, and we see that it's underwater. So this is a super cool continuity connection where like there's an example of like they didn't have to acknowledge that, but they did. The other point in all of this is they get the other Judees out. So while Team Avatar mostly just walk by them and then they have to go on their big chase with Long Feng, here we actually have them getting the other Judees out. They just get the information that Susu was here, but she got selected to be one of the better Judees and isn't really here anymore. And that's just a nice little moment, because we get them out. We position some of them as going back to their homes. The ones who don't really have homes to return to get to work at the Wen Bakery, because they take people in all the time. They need the help. And that's kind of where they seem to be kind of at the end of the book. Just a nice little resolution to like, hey, we took out the Judee kind of production facility basically here, to the point where they have to move everything like all the way back into the palace as we get into the final like sequences of the book, which I think is pretty cool. This is definitely the point in the book where like the pacing starts to get like quite intense overall, because it's at this point like, yeah, some of the kind of other stuff begins to kind of happen and pile up. They realize that like, okay, we've got to infiltrate the palace now, and we get that, okay, Xuan and Jin are going to go and do this, and you know, this is where you get like, yeah, they're going to use they get the information about the eclipse from General Sung. That's the key piece of information. That's how they're going to actually have a chance to make it happen. But interestingly, it doesn't work. They fail during the eclipse because there was some other kind of suspicious stuff going on. So they get captured as the eclipse kind of happens and goes down. And this leads to like this is kind of where the big reveal of the book ends up kind of happening here, which is, I suppose, yeah, before the big reveal happens, this is sort of the section when they get captured and the immediate kind of build up to that as they're undercover. This is where they begin to truly kind of come together as a couple, because you get to see them kind of act, quote unquote, undercover together as boyfriend and girlfriend, where like, it's meant to be like what, Jin working in the laundry department in the palace has a secret boyfriend in the Dai Li. That's like a fun kind of thing. But you see that the two of them are kind of heading in that way in the first place. This is where the last few bits of them both kind of fully coming clean about all these kind of key parts of their lives to each other comes out. That a large part of why Xuan is helping so much is because his father, also who was killed, the last thing his father asked him to do was to protect his sisters, and that he would do anything to protect them. And he kind of used like that's effectively the same thing that's happening to Jin. And because I care about Jin, I'm going to help her, get her sister back. And that's why he's so kind of devoted to all of this. A lot of the big kind of moments begin to kind of happen at this point. He's inspired. He, of course, gets a little bit injured when the mission kind of goes wrong. She kind of helps to nurse him back to help. And again, we get the build up to sort of her Jin's second kiss of the book, and the idea that she always makes this leap of faith because she's that romantic at heart and just goes for it. But this time it's the relationship she expected it to be. And it's just like, yep, cool, great, they're going for it. And I do like that there's no missed communication here or anything like that. It's just they're a couple at this point. No questions whatsoever. Which is where I think we need to bring the Susu stuff into play. Yeah, I don't think I've really brought up the Susu section of this just yet. I think she's an interesting character, but also her role within the book in terms of when she is and isn't involved in the book, especially like as herself, we get very little in a way time with normal Susu. But I think she still comes across quite well, where like early on, they get across like how charismatic she is. That in a way, Susu is more representative almost of the Jin we saw on the date with Zuko than anything else. And she's the one who actually prefers being kind of out and about in or around the city. She's not overly into the baking side of the kind of family. She respects it, of course, but she prefers doing the deliveries, whereas Jin is actually the one who actually prefers the technique of baking and stuff like that. And they even go as far in this book to give Jin sort of her visualization techniques surrounding earthbending relate to like kneading dough and stuff like that, which is kind of cool. So yeah, that's really cool. The little moment where like Manager Fung is very particular, but she's usually able to talk him down from a discount and stuff like that. She's always kind of like teasing Jin about this and that. She's the one who has maybe the bigger dreams for the future, really wants the upper ring parties and stuff like that. But she still super cares for her family, minus her father, of course, which is interesting. But she immediately, like no questions asked, puts herself on the line for her family, only basically asking Jin to look out for her family. She trusts Jin to kind of do that. But then, yeah, after, that's like about the first like 6-7 chapters in the book, Susu's not really in the book again until like the last 6-7 chapters in the book, because it's Judy Susu that we have for most of the book. But yeah, she gets brought into the Judy program. She ends up basically being chosen as one of the proper Judys who's actually going to go out and about and kind of do stuff. So she does get the brainwashing, of course. She doesn't remember Jin in the scenes that they have. The second scene when Smellerby and Longshot are with her, she gets through a little bit where she mentions Susu's little sister Ming, but ultimately there's no particular progress made here. And by the time we're at kind of going through the book here, Susu is one of the Supreme Bureaucratic Administrator Judys, alongside like the original one and I guess the few remaining ones. And they're kept secure in the palace. Interestingly, when Jin is captured, she actually goes to see her. And part of the reason she goes to see Jin is because the story she's been told is that these two people came in to kill you. But Jin is really vociferous in saying that, no, I'm here to save you. So she wants to see why there's such a big gulf between the two stories. And this is like the big moment kind of here in terms of like, okay, third time's the charm. Is she actually going to be able to get through to her? She's obviously had some of, I guess, the discussions with Smellerby and Longshot about like how was Jet convinced kind of to kind of turn things around. You have to play on the big emotional moments, the important things in the life. So Jin tries to make some progress by kind of talking about, baby Ming, her grandmother's been sick recently, bring up that. And it's interesting because it doesn't seem to work. Like, obviously, they're brainwashed in a way where they try to deny, like, most all of this kind of stuff. Ming, the mentions kind of sort of get through. But Jin, I think, makes the right approach here. She got quite chaotic and emotional towards the end of the previous two attempts. But this time she's a bit more cool-headed about it. And it's just like, hey, when you come back to see me again, bring our favorite dish and we can talk again. And maybe something will happen. And Susu's just like, no, I don't think I will come back. But a few days later, she does come back. So some of this is gradually beginning to get through to the point where clearly Susu in her head is questioning some of this stuff. That like, hey, we're just having normal conversations here. I don't remember this stuff, but it, other than her saying some kind of crazy stuff, nothing weird is happening here. Which leads to the big moment. The really, I think, strong moment in the book. We had to build up to this. It had to work really well. The food is brought. They have the egg tarts, of course. Big focus in the book. One of the items from the bakery, basically. Jin holds hers out. And then without even thinking, Susu taps hers against Jin's. And is immediately like, why did I do that? I didn't intend to do that. But it's exactly the moment that's needed. It's just this subtle little thing from, I guess, the moments that Susu often remembers most fondly. Just those moments hanging out with Jin, her best friend / sister to a certain degree. And this is the moment where it kind of breaks through. And I just thought this was so well done. This little gesture opens the kind of the waterworks here, and she finally remembers and kind of begins to remember overall. And I think it's so cool here because there is a little bit of a switch here where it's almost shock. Like they're all like, it's so emotional, it's going to be slow. And then within the space of a scene, Susu's almost immediately back to normal, just kind of cracking jokes, making fun of Jin and Xuan and how close they are and stuff like that. But I do like this other big moment, which is like she does get serious for a second and it's like, whoa, wait, Jin, actually. Now that I have the full context for this situation, like, it's crazy that you have done all of this, like, undercover in the palace. You've come all this way for someone who is only a friend. And Xuan had actually stayed out of all of their interactions, just kind of pretending to be asleep, basically. But he actually steps in at this point, which I think is quite fun and clever, to highlight that, whoa. You two are more than just friends. You are basically sisters. She did all of this for you because, most important person in her life, basically. That's why she's doing it. And it's just a kind of perfect moment to kind of incorporate the kind of trio now together. And then she teases them about like their kind of budding relationship and the idea of like, oh, I guess there's a new brother kind of joining the family at this point. It's the right way to kind of do things overall. Which then leads to this very interesting scene. I was wondering, like when you think about the Judy concept, would they ever do something like this? Given some of the dynamics at play with the Judys, which is the idea of, what if someone becomes a Judy and was taken away from something they were absolutely happy to get out of? And that's what we get with this particular Judy, who is annoyed at Susu, Jin, and Xuan for almost trying to ruin the great life that she now has as a Judy. She doesn't mind the brainwashing or what she's forced to do, because she now gets to live this upper ring life away from her terrible life in the lower ring. And it speaks to obviously how it's not great for everyone in the lower ring, the fact that someone could kind of feel this way. But obviously there's also the selfishness of like, this is not just this other Judy kind of fighting for themselves, but like, no, we have to keep the whole project a secret, including the other Judys, just to protect kind of like my situation. But it's complicated, and it's interesting, and there's just the kind of shocked reluctance. They're all forced to accept the fact that like, well, what do we do here? We're not going to be able to convince her, because she truly believes that it's the wrong thing to do, is to stop being a Judy. I guess we just have to knock her out, basically, and they just have to, unfortunately, get violent with this Judy to get Susu out. It's a very suddenly real moment in the middle of all this stuff happening. That's quite interesting. Like, if the whole book perhaps delved like crazy deep into the whole Judy project, it would have been interesting to get a few different angles on what it is to be a Judy. But we still got, I think, some nice detail added onto it here overall. And yeah, they make their way out. This is where you see the book is quite fast paced, in that like they really quickly get them back to the lower ring. Susu gets her big reunion with her family. Interestingly, like they have this mostly play out kind of off screen, as Jin and Xuan have a kind of little moment on the rooftop, basically over the bakery, and then they get kind of teased again. So that's kind of cool. But yeah, she is kept out of the battle as we kind of get into the final sequence of the book. But this is probably where we need to go back to the full details of what happened with the Silver Fangs, and the truth of like what happened during all the kind of craziness. Where do I have this? Yeah, here. Yeah, when they're finally taken out of the prison, because they're now working with Susu, who's kind of giving them information because she's now on their side, we get the almost like crazy scene that happens when they're like, wait, Aunt Sumi's with the Dai Li, what are we doing here? And then the slow, gradual reveal of like, hey, think about this a little bit more. What are we actually doing here? We're putting our Pai Shou pieces in the right position here. Why is Aunt Sumi part of the Dai Li at this point in time? Wait, why has Xuan's mother just walked out here as if this is all completely normal? And we get the reveal that this betrayal is actually the best way to kind of infiltrate the enemy to kind of try and get the city back at a later point. We basically get details surrounding this that are effectively the idea that Aunt Sumi kind of quote-unquote joined the Dai Li, had connections, got involved with the Dai Li for a few reasons. One, to give the impression that the Silver Fangs were completely taken out with the infiltration of Ba Sing Se. Two, was to actually try and find out within the Dai Li which agents were loyal and which ones weren't loyal to the Earth Kingdom. So we do get that kind of reveal where like, oh yeah, it wasn't just every Dai Li agent went with Azula. There were still some of them kind of left here that were loyal. And that was kind of facilitated, made into something that could actually do something by Aunt Sumi. But of course they have to act like they have actually betrayed everyone so that they can be useful later on down the line. And this is also how they sort of facilitated like, okay, we'll fake kidnap in a way Dr. Jan, actually to give the impression like we're taking apart the Silver Fangs, but actually she's okay. but this only works if we tell as few people as possible. So we do get the moment where like Xuen is a bit taken aback by the almost betrayal. Like, why didn't you trust me, mother, to actually tell me about what happened here? It's pretty interesting. It's pretty intricate, actually. It's the most intricate plot in the book, where you realize that, like, oh, this is crazy White Lotus playing both sides dynamics, and it's actually very interesting. But yeah, they then work. You know, they get they'll only participate in everything if they're allowed to get Susu out, with the idea that what is the plan to eventually take everything back, and it's that we have to be careful about spreading the plan, but the plan has to be spread to everyone in the lower ring. We'll communicate what the message is kind of later on, but we will make it happen. And this is where I think this is also quite clever that the book uses this. The plan to best distribute this is to use the bakery. We'll make a specific kind of item on the menu that only kind of Earth Kingdom people would get. The Fire Nation people won't touch this particular delicacy, and we'll hide the messages in that. That's the really, really cool kind of part of it. And like it has a White Lotus symbol on it. And there's a very interesting lore drop where we get the idea that, like, the idea is that a lot of people in the Earth Kingdom, especially if they've been in specific, you know, places for generations, will know the significance of the White Lotus symbol, that it means more than just one of the symbols in the Game of Pi show, that it means Order of the White Lotus related, and they know that this is something particular to focus in on, which I would like a little bit more context on what they were exactly getting at with that moment, but it's a cool moment in it when it actually happens. This also leads to, I think it's a little bit after this, but the moment where Jin has the interesting conversation with the kind of female Fire Nation soldier, who at the end of the chapter is revealed to, I guess, be an Order of White Lotus member who has, I guess, infiltrated the Fire Nation army. And so it's like, oh, this is how deep this actually goes. So when we get to the final sequence of the book, where do I have this? I guess it's the Smellerby long shot segment I should probably go to for this. We have basically our kind of fighter characters taking over specific districts, but the people gradually rising up. And so you have this orchestrated, actually like well communicated kind of rebellion of the people. So at the same time as like our main White Lotus members are attacking from over here, causing a lot of chaos, the whole lower ring of the city is also rebelling. And the idea is, even empowered by the comet, they're hugely outnumbered here overall. And they kind of really highlight that the idea is that, like, the comet only lasts so long. And in a city this big with this many people involved, it's like, yeah, if we can cause a lot of damage while the comet is up, the second the comet goes, we have the massive advantage. Now, this is where we do get into the final sequence of the book, and this is probably actually the biggest surprise reveal from the extra content in the Barnes & Noble copy of the book, is that in the initial, I guess, draft of this kind of action chapter, the entire Sozin's Comet like battle sequence in the book takes place over the course of, like, I think it's under 2 pages. If I haven't read it in a little bit, but like the initial thing was just really boom, 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 like 2 pages and we're done. And they were like, yeah, expand this out quite a bit more. Like, we're doing some character work here because, of course, we've got Smellerby and Longshot, and hey, do you know what enemy makes sense to also turn up for the big battle at the end? The Rough Rhinos, who are connected to Jet. There's your action, and that works, I think, really well. The action, I think, is pretty cool. It pretty much comes down to kind of a few key moments. One would be that when the archers get involved, Schwen takes like 2 arrows and nearly kind of is killed falling off a building. It gets a little bit kind of maybe undercut by the fact that like it's viewed as almost like a death scene as it happens, but he gets up and is ready to go pretty much like pretty quickly after that. But the intensity in the final battle with our characters here very much comes from the kind of blood feud, effectively, that is the Rough Rhinos versus Smellerby and Longshot, because of like what happened to Jet. And even though it's, I suppose, not directly the idea that Smellerby and Longshot have an issue with the Rough Rhinos, it's the right way to do this dynamic, given that Jet will always have that kind of tragedy of like he never actually got to confront the people who destroyed his village. They will do it for him, and it gives them this kind of cathartic moment like at the end of the book where they get to full on go against the full lineup of the Rough Rhinos and basically come out on top, because of course in canon we can't kill the Rough Rhinos because we know they survive into the comics and so on. But they end up having to flee the battle covered in like arrows and stab wounds. Like numerous times during this final fight it's described that like Smellerby just like stabs like Monkey in the shoulder, like one of the others just gets like stabbed in the leg. I think Colonel Monkey turns around and it's described that there are like 3 arrows in his back from Longshot. And it's just this real sense of like they really do some damage to the Rough Rhinos to kind of force them to retreat. But, our hero characters do win the day. Now, there's some interesting moments. I think I mentioned this in my review of one of the chapters. The big distraction, because when Schwen goes down, he gets captured by the Rough Rhinos. But what allows them to sort of like reverse this situation is that this is where we get reference to the old masters, the Grand Lotuses, being present on the battlefield. So we get references to like Tundra tanks flying through the air from Boomy. And then we get what on an initial read-through seems like, oh, is this Zhong in the background here doing his kind of crazy fire thing? But the description in the book doesn't really match what Zhong is doing. And I'm kind of like, is this almost like the reveal of like, here's what Iroh was doing while all this was happening? Because they more describe, rather than like walls of fire and stuff like that, that it's someone like flying around on a tornado of fire. That sort of thing. Let me see, can I find where I have that? Yeah, we turn only to see a giant pillar of fire swirling through the sky like one of the dust storms from the desert, except it's inside the walls, inside the city. There's a figure that flies inside of the pillar like they're in the midst of a storm. And Zhong, you would never describe the way he is flying in the air as being in the middle of a storm of fire or anything like that. He's not inside necessarily whatever it is he's doing. So is that what Iroh is doing? It's a weird one where that's not entirely kind of clear as to like what exactly is kind of happening there. Because I think it would have been cool, given that in the epilogue we get the reveal that Jin actually realizes Lee is Fire Lord Zuko. It would have been a cool moment if they maybe more directly kind of got that moment of like, wait, she realizes, is that Mushi from the tea shop like doing this like unbelievable firebending move to kind of save the day? But they maybe didn't want to go like crazy overboard with it overall. But yeah, going into the final scene of the book, I guess the epilogue. The main things we get out of the epilogue are just that it's actually mostly about Smellerby and Longshot, which is kind of weird that they just highlight they're not sticking around in Ba Sing Se. They are going to go back to Gai Pan and General how one of the other Council of Five members is going to be the ones bringing them there. Now, that's meant to be, I suppose, a bit of a reference to the comics, because in The Promise, we have Smethurby and Longshot appear in that comic, but General Howe is also in that comic as well. So it explains why they're in the rough kind of vicinity of each other, even if maybe there's a bit of time between those kind of events happening. You get stuff like, they're friends enough now where they consider Jin an honorary member of the Freedom Fighters, and that they're gonna come back to visit her, which is, I think, is a cool dynamic to have. We again address the idea that the trio, Jin, Xuan, Susu, are all kind of together now. They're going to a party this time, a proper upper ring party. They've been invited to it. The Avatar is going to be in attendance, so Susu's going to get her wish, and that's pretty much where it ends, with just the idea that things are going to be good in Ba Sing Se, thumbs up. But like I said before, my only issue with the ending really comes down to the fact that it surprisingly doesn't give you much with Jin or Susu or Xuan with the ending, because it does just end right there. It's more of an ending for Smethurby and Longshot than it is for the actual main characters of the book. And it's are we going to come back to this at some point to say something more? What is the pathway for these characters at the end of this book? What does Jin do going forward? Does she go into calligraphy? Does she stay at the academy? Does she pursue her earthbending more? Does she get more involved, intertwined with the Silver Fangs? Does she stick around with the Wen Bakery? Or what? The book never fully kind of commits to anything at the end, because to a certain degree it kind of did all those things with Jin. Jin ends the book kind of she used all of those skills in different ways, but it's does she have the time to utilize all of them going forward? They never fully put her on the pathway to one of those things. It's a tough one here, because on one hand I'm it's fine to end the book like that. On another, I feel this ending also maybe highlights that, did you actually have a plan for the character? Because it is ended mostly just in the air, where I think you could have played a little bit more with the idea that jump ahead to the comic timeline where we are right now. Highlight, where things are in a few months from now, a year from now. What is Jin doing and stuff like that? What are the plans for the future necessarily? How have things changed or evolved with the city? I think post-war, I think it would actually been fascinating to see what changes in the lower ring with the war now over, and King Kuei properly in control of Ba Sing Se. Are things better now in the city for everyone? Is there a need for certain things to still be the case, or anything like that? It's those kind of little moments that I think are where there's frustrations, and especially when it's does Jin get involved with Mok Mu-ling, because Mok Mu-ling was kind of interested in kind of speaking to her more and stuff like that. I don't know. But it does feel to a certain degree they've missed their opportunity to do something with Jin, because when's the next time we're going to get Jin focused content ever? I don't think we're getting another novel about Jin. I don't think the plan for Avatar Legends is for it to be sequels to the books that are here. I think they're all meant to be one-offs. We'll see what they do, but I think it is going to be one-offs. That's where my kind of frustration is a little bit, is that to a certain degree, how much has kind of changed from Jin in the opening scene of this book to the end of the book. Okay, she now has her kind of boyfriend, kind of true romance that she wanted. Susu is back in her life after those kind of first couple of chapters, but it still feels like all the the main, like, complications in a way in her life are still there. To a certain degree, she has more of them almost now than ever. That's just one of those things for me where, like, I do like a book to have a bit more of an extended epilogue. That's just cross the board. I like that in all of my media if possible. I don't like the super vague, just make it up yourself what happens going into the future. Give me some direction, and I don't feel this was an ending that gave you too much direction. But that's basically kind of my thoughts on the kind of whole book. Is there anything I didn't cover here? We covered him. Makmu Ling is kind of fun. I don't think I actually showed her image while we were talking about her, but yeah, this character from The Tale of Sokka is who Makmu Ling is. So that's cool. Lee and Mushi, of course. We covered that stuff quite a lot. Yeah, I think that is most everything I wanted to highlight. I might have skipped over maybe some little action sequences of the book that were kind of interesting, but broadly speaking, that was kind of it. So yeah, like, I think it's a good book. Like, if I was to give it like a score out of like 10, like, it's not a 10 out of 10 book because I just don't think it's like the most interesting Avatar novel we've ever seen. 9 out of 10, probably not. It to me feels like a really, really just solid, like, this is an 8 out of 10 book. Where, like, there's been better Avatar novels, but this is super solid. And especially if you want like a tie-in novel directly to ATLA, this one ties in pretty well because the location, Ba Sing Se, explored really well. If you like Jin, you definitely will be inclined to like this. But even if like Jin is a character you barely remember, I think they still do a good job with her. And I think in a way, the only kind of criticism of this really is just that, like, I can see this series being in a situation, like, as we go forward, where, yeah, for some fans, if they don't choose an interesting enough character or an interesting enough location, the book might not be something they're super interested in. For me as a fan, where I'm inclined to like a lot of Avatar things, I don't have like so hyper specific tastes that like parts of Avatar don't interest me, whereas I'm someone who's like, yeah, give me all these novels, give me a comic about this random thing, a novel about this random thing, give me the upcoming middle grade novel, Light It Up, that seems super interesting to me. I can't really overly imagine them doing a book where I'm just like, actually, you know what? No. But again, it's hard to see. Like, what is book 5 of this series going to look like? We've maybe swapped back and forth between eras a few times. We're coming back around. Yeah, like, what if they do just do one and it's a little bit of a miss and stuff like that? It's a very mundane Avatar book. You know, they might run out of ideas after a few of them, but I don't really know what the plan is necessarily. I'm assuming the reason they've committed to this being a series is that they probably have a vague plan for at least a couple of books. I'd be really surprised if, like, we're in a situation where they maybe don't know immediately what... I'm guessing they know what book 2 is, because, you know, I'm guessing it's going to be July next year when it comes out. We'll see what happens with that. Like, I suppose that's a question, actually, for worth noting here. Is just like, will... I think this is a kind of interesting kind of question here. Is on the novel side of things, of course, we're in a unique situation where the next novel is not out until the very end of the year. So when we get to New York Comic Con, it feels like it's going to be too early for like detailed preview stuff on Awakening of Roku, though we still need the proper description for that book. If they're going to have any novel reveal at the convention, it feels like it kind of has to be what book 2 of Legends is. And this would line up with the way they've done reveals in the past, which is that they have revealed the novel that's going to happen in, effectively 9-10 months at New York Comic Con here. Even if it's just the very, very early reveal, that seems to have been the plan so far. The question is, we don't really know what the structure is, in that, like, are we absolutely sure, locked in, that Legends Book 2 will be a July release next year? Do they already have that in place? Are we keeping the same author? Are we switching the author up? Because we're not doing these in duologies, are we just switching authors like all over the place now, or what? That's, I think, the big question here. I wouldn't mind if Judy Lynn stayed on board and did another book, but I also wouldn't mind if they switched up what author they have for this one as well. It all depends on like what they're doing. Obviously, it's, I'm guessing, going to be probably a Korra book, would be my guess, just because, like I highlighted at the start, the description of what the series is mentions Korra specifically, and I think it would be an odd way to start things off by just doing 2 ATLA books back to back before you've confirmed that like you're actually doing other eras. I'd be very surprised if we jumped from Avatar to doing a completely other era before we went to Korra. But then it also brings up the question, it's just like, is it only ATLA and Korra? With the idea being that, like, to a certain degree, like, do we even know any unsung heroes in the other eras? And it's like, kind of like I've brought up before, that to a certain degree, like in the Roku era, Princess Zaysan sort of fits the role as an unsung hero in that era by virtue of the fact that, like, we've actually learned quite a bit about the Roku era, and the RPG information is a bit of a shock as to actually how important she is, even though we never knew it before. But if we can only tell stories with characters as teenagers, can we actually do anything here? There are definitely kind of some ideas that they could do. Obviously, locations is kind of where I'm thinking about quite a lot, because obviously, like, for the series, we have unsung heroes, and let me actually just check what it says on Edelweiss. I think that has the slightly better description for what the situation is. What do we have here? Key selling points. Yeah, including the ways that they have shaped legendary events in Avatar history. The novels will feature encounters with familiar fan-favorite characters along each protagonist's journey. And this is what makes this series different from that. Okay, so they are highlighting that they've shaped... So what's this? Unsung Heroes. Shaped legendary events and have met notable characters. So these are the kind of like traits that make up this series. These are the things that are going to happen. The main character will be an unsung hero of sorts, not one of the absolute, I guess, main characters. They will be effectively like involved, inadvertently involved. Surprisingly, how much they were involved in the major events of Avatar, Korra, or whatever. And, of course, the whole cameo character situation. So for this book, of course, this is Smellerbee, Longshot, Mok Mu Ling, I guess Lee, Mushi, General Sung, those type of characters where like there's a mix of like, okay, some more notable minor characters, a few one-off characters here, and then kind of allusions to some of the other kind of more notable characters, and how do you do that, of course. So the idea is like, okay, so it has to be in a way something that happens as we kind of go through an event. And it's like with Korra, there's obviously, okay, the equalist uprising. You can tell it from a perspective of someone involved in the city somewhere. But I do wonder as well that, like, are we still going to be limited here by only doing teenage characters? That seems to be what the Avatar novels have always interpreted YA as. And that could be limiting, because I could see, like, say, Gomu from Korra getting something like this, where, like, you cover him, you could touch on his backstory, where he knew the city from a slightly different kind of time. But I don't think they're going to tell a story about him. And then, like, are there that many, like, teenage super minor characters to focus on in Korra? And then it feels like, are we going to have to go as far as to, like, you know, give Wei and Wing their own book or something like that, where, like, okay, they're there and thereabouts, but, like, we don't know that much about them. But yeah, Zaison definitely makes sense to a certain degree, but even then, it's like the Zaison story that kind of we want to be told is effectively, I think, the story surrounding her downfall, basically. The expected downfall of this character, which we do expect to be pretty brutal and tragic, that I guess shows how brutal and maybe cunning Sozin is that the place for something like this? It would be really interesting, but does it quite fit what this series is doing? That's the big question there. It also takes place kind of like it's a full adult kind of character at that point. Like, it's not like teenage Zaison, unless we want to highlight like a separate story earlier on that happened. Like, I suppose there is the whole idea of, like, maybe it is her, like, first meeting Ryo-Shan and stuff like that, when she's kind of still kind of within the YA kind of age range. But is that the legendary events? I'm not really sure. Where to rank this book out of all the Avatar books that I've read? Like, it's an unfortunate thing, because I feel like it's weird saying this, but, like, to me it probably comes out bottom of the 6, I guess, we now have. But it's comparing apples to oranges, basically, because it's like the 5 books I would rate above this are intros into complete new eras of Avatar. They are books that have so much more, like, world building going on with them. Like, every element of those books is effectively, like, new at all parts of the story, whereas this book is more built around references and how it, like, incorporates into those arcs, that it's just kind of going to be that way kind of by default, where, like, sure, I can see the idea, the argument that you might make for, like, preferring this over some of the other Chronicles of the Avatar books, but like I do think you have to be like, you know, particularly leaning towards like liking Jin like a lot as a character. But I would also say just that I think the writing kind of approach style of the Chronicles books I think is better, more along the lines of what I kind of want. But as we went through here, like it's not like I have giant criticisms with this book. It's just like, yeah, if you ask me to do a list of 6, yeah, the, you know, Kyoshi 1, 2, Yang Chen 1, 2, Roku 1 are all coming in above this book. Just because, you know, introductions to Kyoshi, Yang Chen, Roku eras, that's kind of a little bit more interesting. Because, you know, perhaps you could say one thing that this book didn't really do is like, there's really no points where like the book ever kind of just stopped and gave you like almost like a little bit of a history lesson on Ba Sing Se. They never just world built Ba Sing Se more than you would expect them to do. Whereas that's something the other novels are kind of known for, is just like, oh, hey, we're in the Kyoshi era. We're actually going to reference stuff that happened in a previous era, and that's super interesting. They didn't really do that here. There's like a reference to Kyoshi in this book that's mostly just the definition of a powerful earthbender. The only kind of notable Avatar reference was that like someone in Susu's family history shook hands with Roku when he went to Ba Sing Se one time, and that's kind of cool because it's you know, referencing a previous Avatar. That's one of those kind of ways to do it, and like it's in this era, it makes sense. But that's just the thing there. Like it's the same as like comparing some of the other stuff. Like I think it's very difficult to compare, say, like the Promise comic to you know, Bounty Hunter and the Tea Brewer. It's like it's 3 books versus 1. Even if the one book is doing a lot that you really like, there's so much that a 3-part book can do that just like really kind of comes together. They're just like different formats that are kind of hard to compare. Do you think they'll ever adapt any of the books for Avatar Studios? Well, based on, admittedly, an interview from quite a while ago, Mike and Brian said that none of the initial plans at Avatar Studios are for adaptations, which I think makes sense because the whole point of the studio is to make new content. So the idea of them literally redoing content when we're still at a point in the Avatar universe where, I'm sorry, we need to flesh out so many more timelines and stuff like that, fill in gaps before we start just redoing stories just because we want stuff in animation rather than reading. The novels exist because they want to do novels. Let them do new stuff with the animation. That's my thoughts on it kind of right now. Maybe if Avatar Studios can get to a point where they are kind of pumping out content like really, really kind of well, and they can do their kind of new series movies, and they just have a really nice flow. And they can do like sort of Star Wars at specific points where it's like, oh, hey, there's a random project we didn't expect. Yeah, maybe do an adaptation at a certain point, but like not if it's going to take away from that project being anything else that's new, in my mind. In that, like, I would prefer that, like, if they were to do something with Kyoshi, I would prefer it to just be a new story with Kyoshi that can maybe reference stuff that comes from the novels that we know, in the same way that, like, when we get to the new ATLA content, like the movie, they've already basically said, if you've read the comics, you'll have an advantage over people who haven't read the comics, because inevitably there will be characters that they probably just have on screen because they kind of have to, because they've been introduced in the comics, that we'll know, but that other people won't. I think that's just kind of like the way you have to go about doing it here. And then, yeah, there is that canon problem of, like, if they did a Rise of Kyoshi adaptation, what does that then mean? Which is canon? Is the original novel canon, or does the animation make canon? And then you get to this weird idea where typically when you adapt a novel into an animation, you are going to lose a lot of content. So then you're basically saying that the actual true canon thing is the thing that's actually less content than the original material. And it's like, what are we doing? Because I don't think we want to get into a situation where we have that kind of almost split continuity based on, like, what medium you are experiencing a piece of content through. So that's kind of my thoughts on that. I think if we see any adaptations, it will be in almost like maybe like fill-in content just to kind of get people up to speed on specific things. But like I would almost like not really view that as being an adaptation, and more as like a reference almost at a certain point. But we'll have to see what happens. When do I think the next project for Avatar Studios will be announced? It's interesting because I think people have been a little bit taken aback to a certain degree by, like Red Thunder, they're already working on a new series. Like, to a certain degree, I don't think we should be. But it means that, like, okay, yeah, with Seven Havens only being 2 seasons, 26 episodes, once we get going, like, we're going to get through that pretty quickly. And we're immediately going to be wondering what's next. Well, they have what's next basically already in the pipeline, basically. We're going to be expecting them to do the same thing with the movie. And so the idea is that realistically the way it should work, based on the kind of plan thing that we had, the kind of quote-unquote leaked slate of projects, is that it's meant to be like movie 1, the Aang movie, series 1, Seven Havens, movie 2, and then series 2. So that series 2 should be Red Thunder. So whatever movie 2 is going to be, is going to have to be announced like sooner rather than later, I think. Because I think one of the big questions when it comes to that Aang movie is, like, what do we want out of that? Do we want that to be a one-off movie, and then for movie 2 to just be something completely different? Or do we want that second movie to be effectively some sort of a sequel to the first movie? That, like, it's a trilogy of ATLA movies, so we can get that kind of continuity and we just cover the Avatar's content as that? Or do we want to switch between it? Either way, I think they're going to need to announce movie 2 probably before movie 1 comes out. Like, they're going to need to make it clear as you go into that movie that there's going to be some sort of a follow-up in some regard. Especially if the plan is for it to be more of a direct sequel movie. I think you need to tell people that this Aang movie is not just like a one and done type thing. Just to get people's expectations in the right position. As for when I suppose they're going to do that, I don't think they're going to do it at New York Comic Con, because I'm actually really unclear about if they're actually going to say almost anything at New York Comic Con. I think they probably have to put out some sort of piece of information, just because it's a kind of notable date and it's the other big convention. We'll see how big they are or not going to go. But I don't see them maybe making a huge announcement there. But I think certainly as we begin to get into the marketing build-up for the movie, again, it's October, so like it's going to take some time next year to properly get going. I'm guessing like we will know going into it, like we'll have like a trailer, we'll at some point find out that, like, yeah, like what's the deal with the other two movies? How interconnected or not are they? Because the three movies is a thing that's been confirmed for like a pretty long time now. But they've never said specifically what the other two are really going to be about. And then, yeah, more specifically, if you're not paying attention behind the scenes, yeah, they probably will end the Aang movie with the idea that, like, yeah, Aang will return in, I don't know, the next movie. Or whatever. Like, if it feels like maybe the direction they're going in, perhaps, is that the Aang movie is the Aang, I guess, Aang Katara focused movie. Zuko's going to be in it, but maybe not a huge focus. Maybe movie 2 is where we shift the action to, like, the roles get kind of switched around a little bit, where Zuko's the main character. Aang is in it in the kind of equivalent position Zuko is in the first movie, and we get a slightly different view at some of the characters and that sort of thing, where it's quote unquote a sequel to the first movie, but it's not the same plot, because now Zuko kind of activates a different plot point. Suddenly, this is where maybe Azula can come back into play, whereas Aang as the Avatar was more dealing with a world threat somewhere else with the first movie. That's kind of one way to do it, because I'm thinking to myself already the idea of, are we going to come out of that first movie just like, if it is maybe one and done, just satisfied, like, yeah, that was the Aang movie I needed, and now I don't need any more Aang. Like, we're just done here. When actually it's immediately going to be like, what happens next? Like, what happens with these characters in 5 years, like 15 years or whatever? We're going to be wanting some sort of a continuation, and so there's also going to be a sense for, like, yeah, how does publishing react to the movie coming out? Does that suddenly open up, actually, we can fill in the gap now. We can now cover the content between, like, imbalance, basically, and the build up to this movie, the 10 or so years or whatever it's going to be. That's now an active period of time that we can work in, where it's been off limits, basically, for the last, 6-7 years or whatever. That's going to be the kind of really interesting point in all of this. Do you think there'll be a post-credit scene with Korra dying to set up the new series? No, I don't think they do anything like that. I think that would be... It'd be interesting if they did something like that, but I think that would just be a weird thing to do. It's like, it's an Aang-era movie from still relatively early in his life, and then you do an after-credit scene where you skip to, like 100 years into the future or whatever, to show the Avatar after Aang dying, just so you can have a setup for your series. No, I don't think they're going to do that, because whatever the way they're going to do Korra dying, they're going to cover that in Seven Havens, it feels like. Because it's built into the plot of Seven Havens, basically, that they kind of almost have to explore what happened in the last however long in Korra's era, because that's the entire mystery of the show, is like, how did the cataclysm happen? Why did it happen? When was Korra active, not active, involved in relation to all this stuff happening? And yeah, just the information about, like, what is true, what isn't true. That's the built-in mystery of Seven Havens, is like, yeah, what do you think happened here? So I don't think there's any real way they can overly link the Aang movie kind of into Seven Havens, because they're just like two separate parts of Avatar. They can maybe find some way to, I don't know, like, just market the movie with the idea of, like, hey, and you'll also get to see, like, a clip from Seven Havens or something like that. They could do something like that. But I'm not sure. Um, if they do it after credit scene with the Aang movie, my guess is that if it is a trilogy of movies, it would just directly set up the second movie. As in, for me, probably what would work the best is that like the Aang movie ultimately is about him dealing with a villain that comes from sort of some sort of a new location, the Lost Realm or whatever you want to call it. And we deal with that, and it's a really cool movie. All the characters get to do what they need to do. And then in the after credit scene, you like, I don't know, you introduce like, adult Azula. That's an next level like Avatar way to do an after credit scene. Like there's a select few characters I think that you could introduce in an after credit scene that would just get people freaking out, and I think the reintroduction of Azula would certainly be one thing to do that, because open arc, it would allow you to switch the focus of the second movie to Zuko if you wanted to, and to like tease the idea of one of the most interesting characters is maybe going to get their like resolution, that sort of thing. That would certainly be interesting. I wonder if there is a way to do maybe a more kind of fun, clever thing where, like, I don't know, if they, in the after credit scene, they somehow give the more casual, broad, like, reveal of, like, Zuko just goes back home and Ursa's there, and they just maybe joke a little bit about the fact that, like, oh, I've been around for ages, or something like that. Just so you get it in people's heads that, like Ursa being around in Zuko's life is not a crazy thing. I don't know. What is this question? What would they do with the body? Context for what you mean by that? Oh, okay. When the avatar dies, what would they do with the body? Um, hmm. Interesting. We don't really know. Hmm. Yeah. I suppose with Avatar, it's also like, yeah, will they avoid the opportunity of, like, doing some sort of a weird cabbage merchant after credit scene? Or do they do a cabbage merchant reference in the movie? Or is that too much? There's some interesting stuff like that. I guess they have the opportunity with Cabbage Merchant to maybe do, like, well, actually, he's in Cranefish Town, basically. Like, Cabbage Corp could be, like, up and running early on. So, like, I think there's definitely room for them to do a Cabbage thing, but it to be the transition point between, like, it's just him with his Cabbage card and Cabbage Corp directly in Korra. That'd be interesting. Hmm. But yeah, we're slowly but surely getting towards Avatar Studios stuff. It's probably gonna be slightly rough maybe next couple of months, especially like if they maybe don't do anything at New York Comic Con, just because I think there's no like super early like event next year. We might have to be waiting until like maybe April or something like that for some of the more typical events to happen. But once we're about there, like it should properly get going, and because they're a little bit ahead of things, like they're more willing to talk to us about the series and stuff like that. I wouldn't be surprised if we start to get more and more Seven's Havens information as well as we go on. Am I familiar with the Tumblr page Cultures of Avatar? No, I am not. I don't really use Tumblr all that much these days. There was a certain period of time for Avatar where Tumblr was like the place to be, and I would say that was like 2011, 12, 13, 14. But like I do feel like almost to a certain degree, like once Korra ended, like the Tumblr era for Avatar kind of ended quite quickly overall. But yeah, otherwise, like there is still other stuff happening in the year. Like we're only like 2 weeks away basically from Beast of the Four Nations, even though expectations I think for that book have come way down compared to where they were. It still should be fun. But then yeah, after that, like we're not too far away from Avatar Magic the Gathering, which is going to be very exciting when we get all the card reveals, and also Light It Up in the set in the Zito era, which is like a crazy reveal that we got. I think that book is probably going to surprise us with how interesting it is. I suppose a lot really depends on the writing style there, in terms of like how much does that more kids focused writing style actually go into the details of the Zito era versus just covering the character dynamics. But that will be super interesting to see when it finally comes out. But either way, like as a much shorter novel, that should just be cool by itself. And then we just reviewed a novel here. We have another novel this year. Now, admittedly, it's like second last day of the year is when it's out, which is a little bit crazy to kind of think about. But it's this year. It completely ruins the scheduling for all my end of year videos, but they get it on a technical point that yes, it did come out this year. But yeah, there's some stuff happening there, and we'll gradually, hopefully, get like good publishing announcements for the end of the year, and then publishing is probably also where like we're really going to start to see like a lot of the kind of tie-in books, especially from like Penguin Random House, start to get announced. The ones we basically know they're already kind of planning to do, the 4x4 and all that sort of stuff. When we start to see all that, it's going to be kind of interesting and exciting. It's mostly just about, like, I suppose Paramount, in terms of like when will they finally feel comfortable putting visuals out? How secretive are they going to be for how long? That sort of thing. Awakening of Roku, 288 pages. Yes, it is 288 pages. Details, yeah. So far and away, the shortest Avatar novel, which is, I think, kind of interesting. Obviously, the quality of the book isn't just based on page count. But given that like the first Kyoshi novel's over 400 pages, we've certainly been leaning, it feels like, shorter and shorter with these. So I hope that doesn't like suggest anything about the book. It might just be a little bit more focused book. Obviously, we still don't have the description, though. I suppose we kind of know it's, you know, going to be set in the Water Tribe. But if this one is maybe more of just like, hey, it's Roku and Gyatso on a mission, it kind of is more of, to a certain degree, a bit of a one-off. Like, the first book was our Roku intro book. This one is set a few years later. It's going to be related to the first book, of course, but not as much as the previous series, perhaps. Maybe it is just like a kind of smaller kind of engagement, and that's kind of the way to do it. We'll see. When's the next stream? Let me think about that. Because usually I like to time them after something of note actually happens. So it'll probably be post New York Comic Con. So let me just get the details up about that. Here. Okay, so New York Comic Con is the 9th to the 12th. The 12th would be the Sunday. What time is the panel at? Wait, let me see this. So yeah, the unfortunate thing with this is that, like, yeah, the Avatar panel's here. It might be this day. Next stream might be October 12th, because the timing of that's going to be interesting, where, like, it ends at 12. That's 12 New York time. So that'd be, I think, 5 p.m. my time. So if I do a stream, like, in around the time I started this stream, it'd be, like, a few hours after the panel. And if they do have something here, I'm guessing it will be a relatively public thing. And then we'll hopefully have the information from the other panels to talk about at that time. So either it'll be Sunday, October 12th, or it'll be like Sunday, October 19th. But I think the timing of this probably works out well, where, like, unless I have something crazy going on October 12th, it'll probably be here just to discuss on stream the all the panels that we had here. Because again, we have a big lineup of panels here, where we have merchandise panel, publishing panel, and a 20th anniversary panel. We still don't have a lot of details, where notably it just says original voice cast. It doesn't mention Mike and Brian. But I'll mention this again. If it is just the voice cast, why is this panel different than any panel that the voice cast have been attending over the last few weeks? Like, the whole cast, because of the 20th anniversary, is like almost going to like every single convention. And this is one of the big ones. So what is this panel? This is going to be pretty disappointing if they just do what they did at the San Diego panel, but without the announcement. So it kind of feels like they have to throw in something here. Whether that be maybe a first visual for the movie, that'd be cool, or a second Seven Havens visual. That'd be kind of cool. Because notably, we have the logo for the movie, but no proper visual. We have a visual for the show, but we don't have a logo. So I don't know, maybe Seven Havens logo might be something they can give us. Am I planning on covering the Dragon King Kickstarter? Has there been details on that? launching soon. Hmm. Starts September 16th, apparently. I'll cover it when it comes out. I've not really talked about the whole announcement that they made at SDCC, because I don't really know what to make of it, really. Where I don't like that the show is just in this weird position where it's effectively like the future of the show depends on fans supporting this thing, but this thing doesn't fund the show. This thing is basically just meant to show interest in the show to hopefully get other people who have funds to support the show. It's an odd situation where I'm kind of like, I'll review new content for the Dragon Prince if it comes out, but I'm not sure I'm super interested in backing it. It's been a long time since I've felt this way about a show, where I just felt like watching what was apparently the last season of the Dragon Prince, and just like, this is clearly not the end. What's gone on here? Just feeling incredibly confused. Now, admittedly, I'm not like laser focused on the Dragon Prince fandom like I am with Avatar, but as someone who was like somewhat connected, I just felt like, have I missed something here? Like, what's happening with this show? And I don't like that kind of, they're confirmed for some of the stuff and not all of the stuff, and they just kind of keep making it go on. So yeah, like I said, like if more content comes out, I'll review it. But I'm not sure how they actually do the Kickstarter to make it like interesting, really. Because I think a lot of people are just kind of done because of the way it's been handled, it's been communicated. It just, I think enough people are done to where, like, I don't know, this might be a bit of a issue, but we'll see when the Kickstarter actually comes out, I guess. And this is why, like, people being really annoyed at like Avatar Studios for what's happening. Like, at least we have the support from Paramount, where like at the very least we know that like there's like probably 4 projects in production. 2 of them are absolutely going to come out. Realistically, like Red Thunder, I guess, is getting to the point where like, yeah, that's probably getting to the point where it comes out. We're confirmed for at least 2 more movies. We'll see how exactly it goes. And probably a bunch of other stuff as well. And then maybe after those first like 4 or 5 projects, maybe we change things up from there. We see how it goes, but at least we know what we're doing for the next while. Which is obviously a very different situation than Korra, especially, which they actually talked about in the Braving the Elements podcast, which was kind of interesting to see. Like, outside of the minor little bit of news that they had, like, it was interesting to see Brian talk about, like, oh yeah, there was a while there where we didn't have an animation studio for book 2. Like, that is fundamentally the situation that they had. That's why book 2 took so long, is that there was a time period where they didn't know who was going to animate book 2. And that's why Studio Pierrot had to kind of come in, because it was kind of all they could get at the time. Whereas I guess what they're doing now, given that they haven't properly really announced the animation studios and stuff like that, is I'm guessing they're just getting animation studios from everywhere. They're a little bit more, I suppose, proactive about it, like knowing that, like, okay, we have all these projects, we need to get a bunch of animation studios on board, that sort of thing. Yeah, I didn't realize that Piero also left. Yeah, there was still some vagueness about the situation a little bit there, where, like, what actually happened, like, because I think we had always interpreted it as like Piero had to come on as like almost like last ditch, only available studio type thing. They stayed on for the episodes until eventually Mur came back on board, but like they like when they dropped out, like it's one of those things where like I'm guessing they didn't know when Mur were coming back, so they probably initially planned for Piero to do the whole thing, but that wasn't going to work. It seems to be the idea with the quality that they needed. I'd like a more detailed breakdown of like how exactly it all happened. But it worked out. It worked out in the end. Which kind of makes it all the funnier that like, and now Studio Mir are back on Avatar in a very unusual way on the movie where they're sort of like assisting. They were like revealed to be working on the project like 2 years after it started and stuff like that. I'm still very confused by that kind of announcement in terms of like, is that something odd or is that just normal and just because we have so little information it just came across weird to us? Still don't quite know what to make of that. I guess this is maybe where some of the art book information, or just maybe when it actually comes out, we'll hear more of the open stories about like what production was actually like on the movie, how difficult it was or wasn't. Avatar Studios get their own in-house animation studio. Yeah, it would be cool, but doesn't seem like it's gonna happen. So I think them just having their, I guess they're kind of like, they have their own design kind of team in-house is kind of the way we're going to settle on this. We're like, this is how we get the consistency across all the projects, even though they're animated by different companies. But yeah, it is interesting. Just like we're going to go from like a giant gap between art books to like we're going to start to once again be in a situation where we're getting like different types of art books like all over the place. Is this event important? It's New York Comic Con. It's a somewhat equivalent event to San Diego Comic Con. It always is typically an event we focus on. We are again in a situation where we have 3 panels: merch panel, publishing panel, and an anniversary panel. So yeah, we go into this expecting news. Will we get big news from the main panel? Hard to say until we get the full kind of guest lineup on this and we see what actually is happening here. But at the very least, we're expecting some publishing news from the publishing panel. When it comes to like that Kaya comic that was announced at Comic-Con, we'll get more information on that here, hopefully. And the Kyoshi Warrior comic, the 3-issue series. Hopefully we get some information here. Maybe more. Abrams might be able to reveal to us like maybe more information on this book. Maybe the second Avatar Legends novel could be a thing. RPG might get an announcement there as well. And who knows what else. Might be some Avatar Magic news at this, but hard to say. Because of course the... let me get the information on that up. Yeah. The Avatar The Last Airbender debut stream, which is effectively going to mark the start of spoiler season for Avatar Magic, is on October 28th. So this panel is going to be quite a bit before that. I think they'll drop maybe a card or two, but like I don't expect anything more than that. Will Mike and Brian be there? Right now, we don't know. The description just says the original cast members will be there, but there's no list of full panelists, so we don't really know. That's obviously going to be a big one, where like if they end up not being there, maybe we don't really expect any news. If they are there, we probably do expect news, but you know, at the same time, with an anniversary panel, given what a lot of the early news is going to be, which is effectively like probably an image, do you need Mike and Brian there to reveal that? When you have the full ATLA cast, Janet Varney there probably as well, and who knows who else. You can give announcements to other people, especially if it is just like an image and an image that's mostly going to be seen by most people on social media rather than directly the footage of the panel happening. There's some discussions to be had here. But again, the idea is this is what the SDCC panel was called. We got news at it, the Seven Havens image. We have the same panel name again, still highlighting it as the anniversary. Hopefully. Also, it's going to mark basically a year to go. We're going to get past the point where like, okay, we're now under a year until the movie is out. It feels like the timing of this is actually going to be like relatively decent. When do you think they will announce the voice cast members there? Maybe Mike and Brian. It's interesting. Like for the movie, they've announced the voice cast already, though I guess they haven't had a public appearance at anything yet. I don't think they'll do it here because it's still the 20th anniversary panel. So unless they do some crazy like surprise thing where it's like the original voice cast brings out the new voice cast, but I think that's probably more of a like SDCC next year situation in terms of like a major big appearance, because then that's going to be like a couple months before the movie comes out. SDCC, that's the right time I think to do that sort of thing. We're still in the 20th anniversary until February, so that's why we're kind of doing things here. When do you think wait, when do you think they will announce the voice cast members there? Oh, who the voice actors are at the panel. I think we basically know who it's going to be, because like if you look online, like the same team that was at SDCC has been basically at every convention. So like Michaela Murphy is going to be there. Zach Tyler Eisen is going to be there. I'm pretty sure even Katara's voice actress, who was not able to be at San Diego Comic-Con, has been at a lot of the other events. So I'm assuming when they say this is going to be like, pretty much everyone. Like this is going to be like Team Avatar plus Iroh and who knows who else they also kind of get in here. Maybe some of the, like how far they go with the cast will maybe depend on what voice actors are local or something like that. But they've definitely made an effort to have like this be the 20th anniversary thing. Most of the main actors are together, especially if you look on their like social medias, you see that like, yeah, they're attending a lot of these events. So there's no real, I think, surprise there overall. Like you see, like just take this for example. This is from 1 day ago. This is Toph's voice actress. Fan Expo Chicago. She says it's from a few weeks ago, but still, you can see like there's like most of your main cast. It's not everyone, but like it's quite a few of them. They're just attending all these things. Like Which is also why like there's a bit of a thing of like, is that it? Like, is that all the panel's going to be? It's just a voice cast when they've been at like 20 shows this year. Because it's like, it's cool what the rest of the SDCC panel was, but I think we're all going into this expecting news to a certain degree, because the timing of it being like a year to go and stuff like that. You know, are we really celebrating the 20th anniversary of Avatar just by like the actors being here again? Highlight the 20 years by highlighting what's next. That's the big thing for me anyway. So there's that. And again, it's the same thing for the other panels, like the publishing panel. Apart from it saying the companies that are going to be here, it doesn't say the specific people that are going to be here. Creators and writers, like if they follow SDCC, then it's going to be the authors of some of the novels and then people from the companies. But like we'd be wondering like, hey, are any of the comic creators going to be at this panel? It's been a while. Partly because we don't fully know the situation with a lot of the new comics, but you know, we'll see what happens there. But yeah, that's the situation we have. Good again. Look, we've got stuff happening. There's books planned into next year already. Admittedly, some of these have been books that have been pushed into later next year, but still there's stuff happening. Relics of the Four Nations, Awakening of Roku, of course, still coming out. I Am Sokka, sticker book. This is a big one, I think. I at least I want to highlight it as being a big one here. Light It Up, I think, is going to be very, very exciting. Plus other bits and pieces. Some reprint stuff, the baking book, Beasts of the Four Nations. Stuff's happening. It's just, yeah, we are waiting to see the kind of the new content kind of like for next year. Because of course, Awakening of Roku is here. And then so far, none of this is new story content fully for next year. So we need to get some comics and next year's novels announced. And then of course, by the time we're getting to around this point next year, we're going to be expecting like a pretty large lineup of books coming out like for October. I think it's mentioned here. This stuff here. They give you a little teaser here. This is obviously like a little bit of an older kind of like mention of this, but like just factor in that this will be moved into October. Spring 2026 Avatar movie program of books will include a junior novel, an 8x8 book, a step into reading book, and a little golden book, plus a full sticker book. And then they'll also have 2 non-movie tie-in novels with I Am Sokka and book 2 in the Bending Academy series. Tip for otherwise, if you search for Airbender instead of Avatar, the blue people doesn't appear. But sometimes other stuff then doesn't appear, because especially now when we're using like Avatar Legends a little bit more, not like Airbender, everything isn't under Airbender necessarily anymore, I suppose is the idea. Which obviously is already the situation, because like if you want to search for Korra stuff, not that there's been much Korra stuff, you still have to do a separate search for Korra, but anyway. It's one of those things. And I do think the Avatar stuff is sort of interesting as well, because like I've seen it so many times over the months, and you can still see that like they still have placeholders for some of the books, but like gradually you're seeing these other books kind of actually get filled in. Like I think as of like a few weeks ago, this book here, the visual dictionary for the new movie, didn't have a cover, but now it has a cover. Same with this one here, the Ultimate Pop-Up book. You know, they have their movie actually coming out in December, and they're only kind of now getting like covers for a lot of their tie-in books. So it just gives you a sense for how these kind of companies kind of operate. Like some of this stuff still isn't fully like detailed yet, and this is a movie that's like 3 months away. So there's that. Just kind of highlighting that like movies are always kind of like this, where like you just don't get the information that early on. I know we're really frustrated about that, but that's the situation there with Blue People Avatar. So we think we're bad sometimes with like the information, but like, hey, Blue People Avatar fans don't know what the cover of the World of Avatar Updated Edition looks like yet, or the Ultimate Sticker book, and it's out in 2 months. So like there's stuff like that. But yeah, probably going to wrap up the stream there. So any final questions, please let them be heard right now. But like I said, yeah, the next stream will probably be after we have all the panels at New York Comic Con. So probably like October 12th is where the first stream will be. Especially if we have news. Especially if there is actually big news coming out of the convention. Like if we actually get a proper like image for like the Aang movie, Seven Havens information, great. Probably will still do one, even if we only have a bit of publishing information. But you know, just to kind of highlight, you know, we like to do these discussions when these big events happen, because next year especially, these events are going to be huge for Avatar, where like New York Comic Con is going to be like perfectly timed next year, like with the release of the movie, almost to the point of like it's a bit too close. SDCC is going to be directly in the build-up, that sort of thing. But yeah, that's been today's stream. So thanks everyone for watching, and bye.